Wyoming Territory, winter 1877. The snow had swallowed everything, and the woman on her knees was running out of time. Can you hear me? A man came out of the blizzard on horseback, jaw set like stone, gray eyes moving fast across her face, not the look of a rescuer, but of someone who'd learned to count the wounded before counting the dead. Yes, her voice came from somewhere 3 rooms away. How long have you been out here? She didn't answer right away. She looked into his eyes and understood. This man was surviving something too. Follow now, so you don't miss what happens next. The stagecoach left her there. No warning, no apology. Just the driver's boot against the door and the creak of iron wheels already turning away before Adelaide Vance's feet hit the frozen ground. Wait. She grabbed the door handle. Her fingers slipped. The horses lunged forward, and the coach lurched hard to the left, and she stumbled backward into the snow. She fell to her knees. The cold hit her like a wall. Not slowly, not gradually all at once, the way winter in Wyoming hits you. Like the sky itself just decided you had no business being alive. She stood. She brushed the snow from her skirt. She watched the coach disappear around the ridge until the sound of hooves was swallowed by wind. Then there was nothing. Just white. Adelaide Vance Ada. Her mother had always called her. Ada, with the steady hands and the stubborn chin, stood in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And she did the only thing a surgeon's daughter raised by a Polish immigrant mother could do. She looked for a landmark. There was a stone fence post about 30 yards to her left, half buried in the drift. Behind her, a low-slung structure, a relay station, abandoned by the look of it, the door hanging loose on one hinge. In front of her, nothing but white stretching out to where the mountains should have been. She couldn't see them anymore. The storm had eaten them whole. She had a battered wooden trunk, a wool coat, a pair of boots that had been resoled twice, and a letter from a man named Gideon Sterling, postmarked Laramie County, Wyoming Territory, that said, Broken Spur Ranch, 4 miles northeast of the Dunmore Relay Station. Come in November. I will meet you at the depot. November? It was February. The avalanches had closed the rail lines for 3 months. 3 months of waiting in a boarding house in Cheyenne, watching the window, writing letters she wasn't sure would arrive, spending what little remained of her travel money on bread and weak coffee. She had written to him twice. She didn't know if he'd received either letter. She didn't know if he was still waiting. She didn't know, honestly, if there was still a man at the other end of that address willing to honor the agreement they'd made through a matrimonial agency last summer. What she knew was this. The relay station was behind her. The Broken Spur Ranch was 4 miles northeast. She picked up the trunk. God, it was heavy. It had always been heavy. 50 pounds of iron and steel and glass, her father's surgical kit, his bone saws and forceps and scalpel handles, the leather-bound copy of Gray's Anatomy, with his handwriting in the margins, the small glass bottles of carbolic acid and chloroform wrapped carefully in her spare petticoat. She'd carried that trunk across 3 states and 2 territories. She wasn't leaving it. In a Wyoming snowdrift, she started walking. The wind picked up almost immediately, as though it had been waiting for her to commit. It came at her sideways, driving sleet and snow into the left side of her face, and she turned her head and kept walking. Her fingers, even inside her wool gloves, were already stiffening around the trunk's leather handle. She shifted it to her right hand, then her left, then tried tucking it under her arm, then gave up and went back to carrying it by the handle, with both hands in front of her, like a woman carrying a coffin. Maybe she was. She laughed at that, alone in the storm. Her mother would have laughed too. Katarzyna Wieczorek Vance had laughed at the cold every winter of her life, even the terrible ones. You want to scare me? She used to say to the Pennsylvania winters, standing at the kitchen window in her house dress. I've seen worse. Go bother someone else. Ada whispered it now into the Wyoming wind. Go bother someone else. The wind didn't listen. Her nose started bleeding at the 2nd mile. She didn't know it immediately. Her face was so numb, she couldn't feel much of anything below her cheekbones. She noticed the blood when it dripped onto the snow in front of her boot, red against white. She tilted her head back, held her sleeve to her nose, kept walking. Blood on snow. Her father had written about that in his journals. Field notes from the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Spotsylvania, a dozen other places, with names that meant death. The most disturbing element is not the volume of blood, he had written, but how vivid it appears against the ground. Red is not a subtle color. It demands to be seen. She had read those journals 100 times. She knew more about battlefield surgery than most licensed doctors in the state of Pennsylvania. She had assisted in 23 operations before she turned 19. She had held men down while her father amputated their ruined limbs, and she had not flinched, and she had not cried, and afterward she had cleaned the instruments herself because her father's hands were trembling too badly. She had not been afraid of blood since she was 12 years old. She was, however, becoming afraid of this cold. The difference between discomfort and danger, she knew it clinically, had read it in every wilderness medicine text she could find, was the point at which the body stopped shivering. Shivering was the body fighting. When it stopped fighting, that was when you were in trouble. She was still shivering. That was good. Her feet were not shivering. Her feet had gone quiet in a way that worried her. She could still move them, could still feel the resistance of the snow as she pushed through it, but the sensation was distant, like hearing music from 3 rooms away. The cold was working its way up from the ground, and she knew, medically, precisely what that meant. She walked faster. The stone fence post materialized out of the white. At some point she had lost track of how far she'd gone, lost track of time entirely, and then there it was, just to her right, and she nearly collapsed with relief. A fence post meant a fence. A fence meant a property line. A property line meant a ranch. 4 miles northeast, she turned northeast, or what she thought was northeast. The sky was a uniform gray, the sun completely invisible, and she was navigating by instinct and desperation. And the faint slope of the land under her feet, which seemed to be rising slightly to the east. She made it another quarter mile. Then her knees gave. It was not dramatic. There was no cry, no dramatic fall. Her knees simply stopped locking, and she went down slow. First one knee in the snow, and then both, and the trunk slipped from her hands and landed beside her with a dull thud. And she sat there on her heels in the drift, and thought, with a clarity that frightened her, I need to get up. She could not get up. Her arms would not push her. Her legs would not straighten. The cold had settled into her muscles like a debt collector who'd finally made it to the door. Patient, inevitable. Here to collect everything she had. She was not panicking. This surprised her a little. She'd expected panic. What she felt instead was something quieter and more terrible. A deep animal exhaustion, as though her body had simply decided it had done enough. She pulled herself sideways to the stone fence post and leaned her back against it. At least she was upright. At least the wind was partially blocked. She tucked her hands under her arms and pressed her chin to her chest and closed her eyes, just for a moment, just to think. Do not sleep, some clinical part of her brain said. I know, she answered. Ada, I know. The blood from her nose had dried on her upper lip and cracked when she moved her mouth. She could feel it there, stiff and dark. The trunk was 2 feet away, half buried already. Inside it, wrapped in her petticoat, there was a bottle of carbolic acid that would do her absolutely no good now. She thought about her mother. She thought about the boarding house in Cheyenne and the smell of weak coffee. She thought about the matrimonial advertisement she had answered. Last July rancher, age 34. Wyoming Territory, seeks steady woman of practical character, not afraid of hard work or hard weather, and she thought that if she had it to do over again, she would have answered it anyway. She would have come anyway. She just would have brought warmer boots. She almost smiled. Then the hoofbeats. She almost missed them. Her ears were so numb, the wind so loud, the world so uniformly white, that the sound barely registered at first. But horses made a particular vibration in frozen ground, and she felt it before she heard it, a rhythm in the earth beneath her, getting closer. She tried to raise her arm. Her right arm moved about 8 inches and stopped. She tried to shout. What came out was barely a sound, more of an exhalation, a whisper aimed at the wind. The hoofbeats were very close now. She could hear them. And then Through the white, a shape a horse, dark and enormous, moving at a canter with its head low against the wind. And on the horse a man. He almost rode past her. She watched it happen in slow motion. The horse's path was going to carry him 10 feet to her left, and he hadn't seen her yet. He was riding with his hat pulled down and his collar up, and she thought, with a distant, almost academic despair, he's going to ride right past me. She threw the trunk. She didn't have the strength to throw it far. It skidded maybe 4 feet through the snow and hit a half-buried rock with a metallic clang, 50 pounds of iron and steel striking stone, and the sound cut through the wind like a gunshot. The horse shied. The man's head came up. He saw her. He wheeled the horse around and came toward her at a gallop. And even through her dimming vision, she could see that he was a large man, tall in the saddle, moving fast with the ease of someone who'd lived on horseback a long time. He was off the horse before it had fully stopped, boots hitting the snow, and he was crouching in front of her with his hands on her shoulders before she'd quite processed that he was real. Hey, his voice was low and rough urgent. Hey, look at me. She looked at him. He had a hard face, weathered brown from years of sun and wind, jaw dark with a few days' stubble. His eyes were gray, she noticed that, the gray of them, sharp and assessing, and currently running across her face, with an expression she recognized. The clinical scan of a man trying to determine how bad the damage was. Former military, she thought dimly. That's a soldier's assessment. Can you hear me? He said, yes. Her voice sounded very far away. How long have you been out here? I don't. I'm not certain. 2 hours, perhaps. He swore under his breath. His hands moved to her face, thumbs pressing gently below her cheekbones, checking her pupillary response, checking her color, not gentle out of tenderness precise. Like someone who had done this before. I can't feel my feet, she told him. It seemed like relevant information. I know. He pulled off his coat. He put it around her before she could protest, and it was enormous and heavy and still warm from his body, and it smelled like horse and pine smoke, and she wanted to cry from the sheer animal relief of warmth. My trunk, she said. I see it. Don't leave it. He gave her one short, unreadable look. Then he stood, picked up the trunk one hand, like it weighed nothing, which she chose not to be insulted by, and carried it back to his horse. He lifted her next. Both arms, no preamble. She found herself pressed against his chest, with her face against the rough wool of his shirt, and her instinct was to protest, but her body had no protest left in it. My ranch is a mile north, he said. You're going to be fine. She wasn't sure she believed him, but she held on. He got back on the horse, without putting her down, which she noted was physically impressive, and also probably painful, and then they were moving, fast, the horse stretching into a gallop against the wind. She pressed her face against the man's chest and breathed. About halfway there, something surfaced through the fog in her brain, slow, like a thought breaking through ice. What is your name? She managed. He looked down at her. His jaw was tight, his eyes forward, focused on navigating the storm. Sterling, he said. Gideon Sterling. She was quiet for one long moment. I'm Adelaide Vance, she said. I am very sorry I'm late. The silence stretched out between them, filled with wind. She felt his chest expand and contract with a long, long, slow breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. But underneath it, just barely, she could hear something that might have been relief, or might have been anger, or might have been both things living side by side, the way hard feelings often do in hard men. I waited 3 months for you, he said. No, Ada said. I wrote. He didn't answer. She closed her eyes. The horse ran. The snow kept falling, and far ahead, through the white, the dark shape of a cabin began to take form at the edge of the world, small and solid and lit by a single lamp, like a coal burning in the middle of all that cold. She kept her eyes on it until they arrived. The cabin was one room. Ada registered that first one room, one fireplace, one narrow bed against the far wall, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, a wood stove in the corner, with a pot of something that had gone cold hours ago. A man's room, functional and spare, with nothing on the walls, except a bridle hung on a nail, and a calendar from 1876 that nobody had thought to replace. Gideon kicked the door shut behind them. He set her down on the bed, not rough, but not gentle either, just efficient, the way you'd set down something fragile that you weren't sure you trusted yourself to handle carefully. He stepped back and looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. She was shaking so hard her teeth were clicking together. He turned to the fireplace. He'd kept it banked low while he was out riding fence, and now he built it up fast newspaper, kindling. 2 thick logs, and the fire caught and threw orange light across the room. Then he went to the wood stove and got that going too. The cabin was going to be warm in minutes. He clearly knew how to heat a small space in a hurry. "Take off your boots," he said without turning around. "I'm trying." Her fingers weren't working properly. She got the laces of the left boot partway undone, and then her hands stopped cooperating. The tendons locked. The fingers curled uselessly against the leather. She stared at them. Gideon crossed the room, crouched down, and unlaced both boots himself. He pulled them off and set them aside. Then he peeled off her wool stockings, and she opened her mouth to say something about propriety, and then she saw her feet and forgot about propriety entirely. They were white, not pale, white, bloodless, waxy, the color of tallow candles, from her toes to just above both ankles. Frostbite. She'd known it was coming. Knowing it and seeing it were different things. "How bad?" she said. He was turning her right foot in his hands, pressing gently at the ball, the heel, the toes, checking capillary response, checking sensation. Again that clinical, focused, thorough, practiced, not wasting motion. "Second degree, maybe," he said. "Blistering's going to start tomorrow. Could have been worse." "I know what frostbite looks like," she said. "I've treated it." He glanced up at her. "Then you know what comes next," he said. She did, and she didn't love it. Rewarming frostbitten tissue was one of the most painful things the human body could experience, more painful in some ways than the frostbite itself. The nerves, which had gone mercifully quiet in the cold, woke back up all at once when blood returned to them. Her father had described it as fire under the skin. He'd had patients scream during re-warming who hadn't made a sound during amputation. Gideon went outside. He came back with a bucket of snow. "Not direct heat," Ada said immediately. I know. He did know. He packed the snow loosely around her feet, not to cool them further, but to rewarm them gradually, the way you were supposed to, the way most people didn't know to do, because the instinct was always to put frozen things directly near a fire. Direct heat on frostbitten tissue caused burns on top of frostbite. The snow allowed the temperature to rise slowly, controlled. It was the right thing to do. She watched him do it correctly and felt the particular strange relief of being tended to by someone who knew what they were doing. "You've treated frostbite before," she said. "Wyoming winters." He didn't look up. "And the war." She didn't ask which part of the war. A lot of men had come home from that war, not wanting to say which part. He made her drink something hot coffee, terrible, burnt at the bottom of the pot, but hot. And then he sat across from her and watched her shaking gradually slow. The fire was doing its work. The room was warming. Color was beginning to return to her fingertips. The pain started about 20 minutes later. It came on like he'd said it would. In her feet first a burning, crawling, vicious sensation that moved up from her toes in waves. She pressed her lips together and breathed through it. Her hands gripped the edge of the mattress. Gideon watched her. "You can make noise," he said. "Nobody here to hear it." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're just stubborn." She looked at him. He looked back, completely level, no apology in it. She exhaled hard through her nose. "What did you do with my trunk?" "It's by the door." She turned her head. It was there, the battered wooden chest, snow-damp and slightly battered, the leather handle hanging loose where it had been pulled too hard or where something had cut partway through it. She hadn't noticed that in the storm. "The handle," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I had to cut it to get your hand loose." I had my hand on the handle, frozen, solid around it. She turned back to face him. She hadn't known that. She'd been so far gone, she hadn't felt it. The idea that her fingers had been locked around that leather strap, hard enough that he'd had to cut her free. She filed that away in the part of her brain that cataloged things she wasn't going to think about until later. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, already looking away. The silence in the cabin was the particular kind that happens between strangers who have been thrown into an intimate situation, the forced proximity of emergency. There was no graceful way to be in it. She was sitting on his bed. He had held her hands and her feet. He'd carried her, like luggage, through a blizzard, and they had not exchanged more than 24 words in their lives. She watched him from across the room. He was restless standing, then sitting, then standing again, moving to check the fire, moving to check the window. A man who didn't know what to do with stillness. Big through the shoulders, a scar along his left jaw, pale against his weathered skin. He kept looking at her trunk. She noticed that. He'd looked at it 4 times in the last 10 minutes. Go ahead and say it, she said. He looked at her. Whatever you're thinking, she said. Go ahead. His jaw tightened. He pulled one of the chairs out from the table and sat down backward on it, arms crossed over the top rail, and looked at her straight on the way a man did when he'd decided to stop circling something. You were supposed to be here in November, he said. Yes, it's February, I'm aware. I paid for your travel. $40, sent through the agency in August. He paused, and then November came and went, and you didn't arrive, and the agency told me they had no record of any forwarding address. Ada was quiet. I spent 3 months, he said, wondering whether I'd been taken for a fool. There it was. There was the thing under all his efficiency, and his correct frostbite treatment, and his terrible coffee, the thing he'd been carrying since November, or maybe longer. Maybe since before he'd ever placed an advertisement in any matrimonial paper. The particular humiliation of a man who'd been burned before and couldn't quite protect himself from the evidence that he was being burned again. She understood it. She wasn't angry at the feeling. She was angry at the assumption. She reached down and pulled up the hem of her coat skirt. It was still on her. He hadn't removed the coat. Only the boots and stockings. She turned the hem inside out. And along the lining, carefully hand-stitched in even intervals, were 5 small silver dollars. She picked out each one with fingers that were still stiff and painful, and she held them out across the room in her open palm. Your travel money, she said. What was left of it after the boarding house? I kept a record of every cent I spent. I'll write it out if you want. He looked at the coins. He didn't move to take them. I wrote you 2 letters, she continued, her voice even, from Cheyenne, both explaining the rail lines. I don't know if they arrived. I don't know if you believe me. But I came here, Mr. Sterling, in February, in that storm, dragging that trunk 4 miles on foot, because the driver left me at Dunmore, and I was not going to quit. She kept her palm open. I did not steal from you. I did not run. I am not a con artist, and I would appreciate it if you'd stop looking at me like I might be one. The fire crackled. He got up from the chair. He crossed the room and took the coins from her hand, slowly, one at a time. He looked at each one. Then he closed his fist around them and stood there for a moment with his head down. I'm sorry, he said, low, like the words cost him something. I accept that, she said. He turned and set the coins on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Not in his pocket. On the mantelpiece, separate, like he was acknowledging they weren't his to keep. Ada watched this and said nothing. He came back and crouched in front of her feet again, checking the color, checking the swelling. The blistering hadn't started yet, but it would by morning. She was going to be off her feet for at least a week, possibly more. She had already calculated this and was irritated about it. The trunk, she said. I need to inventory it, to make sure nothing broke in transit. Tomorrow, tonight. He looked up at her. I carried that trunk from Philadelphia, she said, through Ohio and Indiana and across the Missouri River and into 2 territories. If a bottle of carbolic acid cracked in there, I need to know before. It soaks through the leather casing and ruins my father's instruments. A pause. Your father's instruments? He repeated. He was a field surgeon. Army, he died 4 years ago and left them to me. She held his gaze. I know how to use them. Before you ask, he held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood, crossed to the trunk, and worked the latch open. He lifted the lid and stepped back. Tell me what I'm looking at, he said. So she told him. She talked him through the inventory, the way her father had taught her, systematic, top to bottom, left to right, nothing skipped. The bone saws nested in their velvet case. The forceps, 3 sizes. The scalpel handles, the spare blades wrapped in oilcloth. The glass bottles of carbolic acid and chloroform, both intact, the petticoat padding still doing its job. The copy of Gray's Anatomy, damp at the corners, but unharmed. Gideon handled each thing carefully when she asked him to move something. He didn't flinch at the bone saws the way most people did. He just looked at them with the same unreadable expression he seemed to apply to everything. "Nothing's broken," he said finally. "Good," she exhaled. "Close it carefully." He did. He latched it and carried it still one-handed. She noted again and set it against the wall near the bed, within her reach. Then he stood in the middle of the room and looked at her, and she looked at him, and they both seemed to arrive at the same moment at the realization that they were going to have to figure out how to exist in one room for the foreseeable future. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll take the floor." "That's not necessary." "It's necessary," he said. Flat, and that was that. He got a bedroll from a chest near the window and laid it out in front of the fire without any further discussion. He brought her a blanket, an extra one, from the same chest, wool and heavy. He checked her feet one more time, color improving, some sensation returning, which meant the rewarming was working, and then he stood up and said, "Wake me if the pain gets bad enough." "I'll be fine." He gave her a look. "Stubborn," he said again, but this time there was something in it that wasn't quite exasperation. Something else. He turned down the lamp and settled onto his bedroll with his back to the fire, and within a few minutes his breathing evened out. Ada lay in the dark and watched the firelight move across the ceiling. Her feet burned, her hands ached. Her nose was tender where the cold had bitten it. The blizzard was still going outside. She could hear it working at the cabin's corners, looking for a way in, and the lamp was out, and she was in a stranger's bed in Wyoming territory, and she had no idea what happened next. She thought about what she knew about Gideon Sterling, which was not much. 34 years old, former Army scout, current rancher. No family mentioned in the agent's correspondence, which was an absence that said something. A man who knew how to treat frostbite and how to build a fire and how to carry 50 pounds of iron one-handed through a blizzard. A man who kept his money worry and his anger very quiet underneath, where it just looked like blankness if you didn't know to look for it. A man who had been waiting 3 months and had assumed the worst and was now managing to be decent about the fact that he'd been wrong. She respected that, actually. It would have been easier to keep the suspicion. Pride made it easier to keep suspicion. Setting it down took something. She closed her eyes. The pain in her feet woke her twice in the night, sharp enough that she had to press her face into the blanket and breathe through it. Both times she heard Gideon stir on his bedroll. Both times she stayed quiet, and the pain passed. By morning, the blisters had started. She knew before she looked. She could feel the tight, fluid-filled pressure along her toes and the ball of her left foot. When she sat up and pulled back the blanket, she counted 5 blisters on the left foot, 3 on the right. Serious, but not catastrophic. No tissue death that she could see in the early light coming through the one small window. Gideon was already up. He had the stove going and water heating, and when he heard her stir, he came and crouched in front of her feet again, with an expression that didn't change when he saw the blisters. "I'm not going to drain them," she said preemptively. "I know better than that. A lot of people don't. A lot of people make it worse." He touched carefully around one blister, assessing the border. "You leave them, they protect the tissue underneath." "Exactly." She studied the side of his face. "Where did you learn that?" "Same place you did, probably. Watching someone do it wrong first." She almost smiled. He made her stay off her feet. This required more negotiation than it should have, and he won mostly because he was already standing between her and the floor and showed no signs of moving. He brought her water and food, salt pork and hardtack, which was grim but warm, and he brought her the Gray's Anatomy from the trunk when she asked for it, and he went about his morning chores, with the door opening and closing, letting in blasts of cold air, the sound of horses stamping in the barn outside. She read, she ate, she listened to the storm, which was finally beginning to tire itself out, the wind dropping from a howl to a steady moan. Mid-morning, he came in from the barn with snow on his shoulders and sat down at the table and started working on a piece of tack that needed restitching. The room was warm and quiet. Outside, the storm was giving up. She had been thinking in the hours since she had woken up about what she wanted to say. She'd been composing it the way her father had taught her to compose difficult conversations. Start with what you know to be true. Then say what you need, said. Then stop, Mr. Sterling. she said. He looked up from the tack. I want to be clear about something, she said. About what I came here expecting. He set down the leather. He gave her his full attention. I answered your advertisement because it said you wanted a practical woman who wasn't afraid of hard work, she said. Not because I was looking to be kept. Not because I needed saving. She kept her voice level. I have skills. I have training. I intend to contribute to this ranch and to this arrangement as an equal working partner. I understand you may have had different expectations. He was quiet. If your expectation, she continued, was a woman who would cook and keep house and look the other way while you made every decision, then we should settle that misunderstanding right now, because that is not who I am, and I will not become her. The fire popped. A log shifted. Gideon picked up the leather strap again and turned it over in his hands, looking at it, not at her. My advertisement didn't say anything about cooking and keeping house, he said. No, but a lot of men mean it anyway. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, I needed someone who could actually work. The ranch is short-handed, and the winters here are brutal, and I don't have time or money to support someone who can't pull their weight. He looked up. I didn't pay $40 for a servant. I paid it for a partner. She looked at him. Then, we understand each other, she said. Seems like. Outside, the last of the storm moved east, and the Wyoming sky began slowly to open up. The light that came through the cabin window was pale and thin and cold, but it was light, real light, the first she'd seen in almost 24 hours. Ada looked down at her bandaged feet. A week, maybe more, before she could walk properly. A month before she'd know if there was any lasting damage to the tissue. Her hands were sore, but functional. She'd checked her grip this morning while Gideon was outside, opening and closing her fingers, testing the range of motion. Everything worked. She hadn't lost anything she couldn't afford to lose. The trunk was against the wall. The instruments were intact. The ranch was outside that door, waiting. She had arrived late and half dead, and she had no idea yet what kind of man she'd married herself to on paper, or whether this stripped-down, frostbitten beginning could become anything worth the journey. But she was here, and her feet were going to heal, and she had her father's instruments and her mother's stubbornness, and a man across the room who had treated her frostbite correctly and set her money on the mantelpiece instead of in his pocket, and who had said the word partner like he meant it. She picked up the Gray's Anatomy and found her page. It was enough for now. It was enough to start. Spring came to the Broken Spur like a debt collector who'd been delayed but hadn't forgotten. The snow pulled back from the valley floor in late March, retreating up the mountain slopes in ragged patches, and the mud that replaced it was deep and black and sucked at boot heels with every step. The creek that ran along the eastern fence line swelled with snowmelt and turned the color of coffee. The cottonwoods along its banks put out their first tentative leaves, small and yellow-green, trembling in the April wind. Ada's feet had healed, mostly. The blisters had resolved clean, no infection, no permanent tissue loss, which she counted as a minor miracle given the conditions. She had a faint sensitivity along the outer edge of her left foot that she suspected might be permanent nerve damage from the cold, but it didn't slow her down, and she didn't mention it to Gideon. There was plenty else to mention. The ranch, which had looked manageable under winter's white cover, revealed itself in spring as something considerably more troubled. Fence lines needed restringing. The chicken coop had lost half its roof to a February storm. The smokehouse door was rotted through. The bunkhouse, where Zeke Thorne and the two other ranch hands slept, needed new chinking between the logs before the summer insects arrived. Ada spent April learning the shape of the work. She was up before dawn with Gideon, and she didn't ask to be included. She simply appeared wherever the work was and did her share of it. She rechinked the bunkhouse herself over 3 days, mixing the clay and horsehair compound and pressing it into the gaps with her bare hands because gloves made it harder to feel the depth of the cracks. She rebuilt the chicken coop roof with boards from a fallen outbuilding. She started a kitchen garden in the sheltered space behind the south wall of the cabin, digging the frozen top layer of soil by hand. Zeke watched her with his arms folded and his expression giving away nothing. Zeke Thorne was 41 years old, Built like a man who'd spent 2 decades doing hard physical work, which he had first as a Buffalo soldier, with the Ninth Cavalry in Texas and Kansas, then as a ranch hand, then as foreman of the Broken Spur for the last 6 years. He and Gideon had served in adjacent units during the war's last year and had found each other again. Afterward, in the way men sometimes did, through shared history and mutual silence about things neither wanted to describe out loud. He was a man of few words and precise observation. He didn't dislike Ada. He hadn't decided about her yet. She noticed this. She didn't push against it. She just kept working. The horses were Gideon's pride. 8 of them, cavalry-bred stock, strong-boned and deep-chested, with the kind of temperament that came from careful breeding over generations. 2 mares in foal. A young stallion named Ira, who was going to be worth real money in 2 or 3 years if he developed the way Gideon expected. They were the ranch's primary income, sold to the army and to surrounding ranches as working stock. They were also, as Ada would come to understand, the thing Gideon cared most about in the world, in the particular way that a man cares about a thing when he has very little else left to care about. The coughing started in the first week of May. Ira went first. She heard him from the cabin, a deep, wet, labored sound, nothing like the ordinary cough of a horse that had inhaled dust. Gideon was out at the fence line. Ada pulled on her boots and went to the barn. Ira was standing in his stall, with his head low, his breathing wrong. Each inhale was too slow and too deliberate, the nostrils flaring wide with the effort of it. His legs had a faint tremor. His eyes, when she looked into them, were glassy in a way that had nothing to do with the dim barn light. She put her hand on his neck. His pulse was slow, too slow, and irregular. She stood there for a moment, thinking. By the time Gideon came in from the fence, 2 more horses were showing the same signs. He walked into the barn and stopped and looked at them, and his face went through something she hadn't seen it do before, a flash of raw panic, quickly controlled, buried under the flat expression he used as a lid on everything else. When did this start, he said. Within the last hour. Ira first, then the 2 roans. He went into Ira's stall. He checked the horse the way she'd checked him: pulse, eyes, breathing, legs. He came out and checked the roans. Then he stood in the center aisle of the barn with his hat in his hand and said nothing. It's not respiratory infection, Ada said. I know what respiratory infection looks like. The pulse is wrong for infection. Too slow. And the tremor in the legs. She stopped. Has anything changed? Feed, water, routine? Nothing. The hay shipment. When did it arrive? He looked at her. Last week, he said. New supplier. The usual man didn't have enough to cover through spring. She went to the hay stored in the far corner of the barn, the new delivery still stacked in its original bales. She pulled a handful loose and brought it to the light from the open barn door. She turned it over. She separated the stalks. She bent close and smelled it. Then she straightened up. Do you have a magnifying glass? In the cabin. Desk drawer. She went and got it. She came back and crouched in the barn doorway, with the hay spread on the floor and the April light falling across it, and she went through it handful by handful, methodically, the way her father had taught her to look at anything. Assume you're going to find something, look until you find it. She found it in the 3rd handful. Small clusters of dried berries, dark purple-black, mixed into the hay so thoroughly they were nearly invisible against the dried grass. She picked one out carefully and held it up to the magnifying glass. Round, smooth, the size of a large pea, with a tiny star-shaped scar at the top where the flower had been. A drop of belladonna. Deadly nightshade. She sat back on her heels. Gideon, she said. Come here. He crouched beside her and looked at what she was holding. What is that? Belladonna, she said. Deadly nightshade. The berries. She let him look at it. Every part of the plant is toxic. The active compounds are atropine and scopolamine. They interfere with the nervous system. In horses, the primary signs are respiratory depression, reduced heart rate, muscle tremors. She paused. It's in the hay. He was very still. The new hay, he said. Yes, mixed in deliberately. It wasn't a question. Nobody mixed nightshade into hay by accident. The plant didn't grow in hay fields. It grew in disturbed soil, in shaded areas, in places where someone had to go looking for it or cultivating it. Getting enough berries to distribute through multiple bales required deliberate effort. That's my read, Ada said. Gideon stood up. He walked out of the barn. He stood in the yard with his back to her, and she could see from the set of his shoulders what he was working through. She didn't follow him. She went back to the horses. Belladonna toxicity in horses was serious, but if caught early enough, survivable. The body's response to the toxins could be partially managed by limiting further exposure. Remove the contaminated hay immediately, replace it, and by supporting the animal through the worst of the symptoms. There was no clean antidote. What you could do was remove the source, keep the horse calm, keep it moving enough to prevent the muscles from seizing completely, and wait. She removed all the new hay from the barn herself. Every bale dragged out into the yard, she replaced the water in every trough. She got the 3 sick horses into the paddock, where the air was better and the ground was open, and she began walking Ira herself, leading him slowly around the paddock fence in the thin spring sunshine, keeping him moving. Zeke found her there an hour later. He came out of the bunkhouse and stopped at the paddock fence and looked at what she was doing. Then he looked at the pile of hay bales she'd dragged into the yard. He stood there long enough that she'd made 2 circuits of the paddock with Ira before he spoke. "What's wrong with him?" he said. "Belladonna poisoning." "It was in the new hay." A pause. "Belladonna. Nightshade berries. Mixed throughout at least 3 bales. Probably more." She kept walking, Ira plodding beside her, head still low, but his breathing a shade less labored than it had been. Someone put it there. Zeke looked at the hay pile for a long moment. "Creed," he said. "Just the one word, flat as stone." "I don't know who," Ada said. "That's not my business to figure out. Getting these horses through it is." Zeke unlatched the paddock gate and came in. He fell into step on Ira's other side, a hand resting lightly on the horse's neck, and they walked together in silence for a full circuit before he spoke again. "You said keep him moving," Zeke said. "Yes, it helps prevent muscle contracture, and the movement helps circulation, which helps the body process the toxins." "You sure about that?" "My father treated a case in a cavalry horse in '64. Same compound atropine toxicity from a contaminated feed source. He documented the whole case. Walking the animal was the primary intervention." She glanced across Ira's neck at Zeke. "I read his notes probably 100 times. Zeke absorbed this. He was a doctor, your father. Field surgeon. Army." Another silence. They walked. "You walked out here and started doing this yourself," Zeke said, "without asking anybody." "The horses needed it now," she said. "Asking would have taken time I didn't have." He looked at her across the horse's back. His expression was still measured, still not decided. But there was a fractional shift in it, some small door opening a crack. "What do you need?" he said. "Clean hay. The uncontaminated stock from the old supplier's bales on the left side of the barn, I didn't touch those. Fresh water in all the troughs. And someone to walk the roans while I manage Ira. I'll get Hector and Davis." "Thank you," he went. Ada kept walking. She spent the rest of that day in the paddock and the barn, moving from horse to horse, monitoring pulses, watching breathing, adjusting. The 2 roans stabilized by mid-afternoon. Ira took longer. He'd gotten more of the contaminated hay, she guessed, being the most dominant animal, and therefore first at the feed. By evening, his pulse had improved, and the tremors in his legs had quieted to nothing. She stood at the paddock fence as the sun went down, watching him move freely across the enclosure, his head coming up at last, his ears forward the way a healthy horse's ears were. Gideon appeared at the fence beside her. He'd been gone most of the afternoon. She hadn't asked where. She figured he'd either gone to find answers or to drink, and she'd had enough to occupy her that she hadn't gone looking for either outcome. The smell that came off him now told her it was the second one. Not sloppy drunk, functional. The kind of drinking that a man did when he was trying to keep himself from feeling something that had gotten too big to carry sober. She'd seen it enough in the months since February, the bottle that appeared on the table. On bad evenings, the way a 3rd or 4th drink changed his silences from thoughtful to unreachable. She looked at Ira, moving in the last light. "He's going to be fine," she said. "All 3 of them." "Good." His voice was slightly thicker than usual. "You want to tell me what you found out today?" A pause. "Creed bought out my note from the bank," he said. 2 weeks ago, apparently. I didn't know. He stopped. He owns my debt now, which means he controls the terms. She was quiet. And the hay supplier, he said, the new one. Turns out, he started buying from Creed's operation 3 months ago. I didn't know that either. She understood then what the poisoned hay was. It wasn't just cruelty, it was pressure. Ruin the horses, ruin the income, make it impossible to service the debt, give Creed grounds to call the note. A chain, each link deliberate. I see, she said. He leaned on the fence and looked at his hands. 3 days later, the bottle had become 2 bottles, and Ada had reached the end of her patience. She'd watched it build across those days, the drinking starting earlier in the afternoons, the mornings heavier. Gideon moving through the ranch work like a man operating underwater. Slower, fogged. Zeke watched it, too, and she could see the worry in Zeke's face, though he didn't say anything. Maybe he'd seen it before. Maybe he'd learned that saying something didn't help. She'd tried patience. She'd tried working around it. She'd tried a quiet, careful evening conversation about the note and the ranch finances, which he had answered in monosyllables before going to bed with a bottle. That was enough. She found him on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the table, with a half-empty whiskey bottle in front of him and his eyes fixed on the middle distance. It was 2 o'clock. There was fence to ride and a trough to repair, and 3 horses still in recovery who needed their afternoon check. She walked across the room. She picked up the whiskey bottle. She walked to the cabin door, opened it, and threw the bottle as hard as she could. It hit the stone of the yard and shattered. Then she turned around and went back for the second bottle from the shelf. That one she threw against the outside wall of the cabin. The sound of it breaking was satisfying, in a way she couldn't entirely account for. Gideon had been on his feet since the first bottle left her hand. He was standing behind his chair now, both hands on the back of it, staring at her. What in the hell? No. She turned to face him, and her voice was very calm, which she'd found over the years was more effective than shouting. We are not doing this. Those are my bottles. I know whose bottles they are, and I know why they're there. And I understand. I do. She took a breath. I understand what it is to lose things you couldn't protect. I understand grief, and I understand anger, and I understand being afraid. She kept her eyes on his. But I did not drag myself 4 miles through a Wyoming blizzard to watch my husband drink himself into a man who can't see the fence in front of his own face. Creed didn't break your horses, Gideon. Your horses are fine. I made sure of that. But he will take everything else if you hand it to him. His jaw was tight. His hands were white-knuckled on the chair back. You don't know what's at stake, he said. I know exactly what's at stake. You told me. $1,400 of debt now held by a man who wants your land. I've been going through your accounts for 2 weeks, and I understand the numbers better than you want me to. She folded her arms. Drinking is not a plan. It is the opposite of a plan, and I will not watch you choose it. You don't get to tell me what to choose. You're right. I don't. She held his gaze. But I'm telling you what I'm choosing. I'm choosing to fight for this ranch. I need you to decide whether you're choosing that too. The silence in the room was very loud. He let go of the chair. He stepped back from it. He ran one hand over his face, and she could see the effort it took, the thing that war does to a man, layered under years of other hard things, and the drink that had been the only lid he'd found for all of it. She waited. He walked past her to the door. He opened it and stood in the frame, looking out at the yard, at the broken glass glinting in the afternoon sun. She waited for him to walk out and saddle a horse and ride to town for more bottles. She had calculated that possibility and was prepared for it. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned around. All right, he said. His voice was raw. Then we fight. She exhaled slowly. Good, she said. Wash your face. We're going to look at the accounting books together before supper. He almost said something to that. She could see it forming. He thought better of it and went to the wash basin instead. The next morning he was up before her for the first time in a week. She came out of the curtained sleeping area. They'd strung a curtain across the back quarter of the cabin in February. A practical arrangement that neither of them had thought needed discussion, and found him at the table with the account books open and a cup of coffee waiting for her. He looked tired and hollow-eyed and entirely sober. She sat down and they got to work. The belladonna, she'd been thinking about it, turning it over. The way she always turned medical problems over in her head had presented a puzzle that now had a solution. But to confirm it, she needed to go back to the barn. She went after breakfast, taking the magnifying glass and a clean cloth. She checked the remaining bales individually, separating the hay into sections on the floor and working through each one. The old supplier's stock was clean. 3 of the new bales were contaminated. The other 2 were not, which meant whoever had done it had mixed the berries in selectively, probably at night, probably recently. They would have needed access to the barn. She came back to the cabin with a handful of the dried berries in the cloth. Someone came into the barn, she told Gideon. Whoever did this had to be inside, long enough to open bales, mix the berries in, and restack everything, in the dark probably. Did anyone come to the ranch in the last 2 weeks? Any deliveries? Any visitors? He thought. 2 men from Creed's outfit, he said. Came about a survey dispute on the south fence. I walked the line with them. We were outside for an hour, and the barn was unwatched for that hour. He looked at the berries in the cloth. Yes, he said. She folded the cloth and set it on the table. Then you know who sent them. I knew before. His voice was flat. Knowing and proving are different things in this county. Creed has the judge and half the town council. Then we don't fight in the courtroom yet, she said. We keep the horses healthy, we service the debt, and we make sure we're still standing when the time comes to fight. He looked at her across the table. You think like a general, he said. I think like a surgeon, she said. You treat what's in front of you. You keep the patient alive. Then you address the underlying problem. He was quiet for a moment. Your father teach you that. My father and every battlefield he dragged me through on paper. She picked up her coffee. He believed in understanding the mechanism of a problem before you addressed it. You can't treat a symptom properly if you don't know its source. Gideon looked at the account books. He looked at the cloth with the berries. He looked at Ada. Zeke was watching you yesterday, he said. With the horses? I know. He doesn't warm up to people quickly. I'd noticed, he said. Gideon stopped. He seemed to be considering whether to finish the sentence. He said, you went into that barn and you started working before you asked anyone's permission. He said, that's the first useful thing anyone's done on this ranch in 3 months. Ada looked down at her coffee. That's generous of him, she said. That's not generous from Zeke. That's a full endorsement. Gideon's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was related to one. He's brought around harder than that. She went to find Zeke that afternoon. He was in the paddock, checking the roan's legs, running his hands down each cannon bone with the care of a man who knew exactly what he was feeling for. He heard her coming and glanced up, and then went back to the horse. She leaned on the fence rail. Can I show you something? She said. He straightened up and looked at her. She had the cloth with the dried berries. She unfolded it and showed him, and she explained what they were and what they did, and how she'd found them. She told him about the atropine and the scopolamine in plain terms, no medical vocabulary, except where she defined it, immediately afterward, because she'd found that explaining the mechanism helped people understand why the treatment worked. She told him about the walking and why movement helped, and what to watch for if any of the horses showed a relapse. Zeke listened. He didn't interrupt. He looked at the berries for a long time. So it wasn't sickness, he said. No, it was poison, and you caught it. I caught it because I was looking at the right things. She folded the cloth again. If it had gone another day, we might have lost Ira. He absorbed that. And the foals? He said. The 2 pregnant mares. Neither of them was exposed. They were on the old haystock. I checked the stalls. They're fine. He exhaled through his nose. Something in his shoulders shifted attention, releasing that she hadn't even seen was there. It was so thoroughly held. Those foals are the ranch's future, he said. If we lost the mares, we didn't, she said, and we're not going to, because now we know to check. He looked at her for a long moment. She had the sense of being very carefully evaluated, not with hostility, but with the precision of a man who had learned, over a hard life, that people were rarely exactly what they appeared to be, and that finding out which direction the difference lay was worth the time it took. You could have waited, he said. Could have come to me first. Or Gideon. Gideon was off the ranch, and the horses needed help now. A lot of people would have waited anyway, to make sure they had someone else to answer to if it went wrong. She thought about that. My father didn't raise me to wait for permission to help someone, she said. He raised me to assess the situation, use what I know, and act. You can be wrong, and you can be questioned, and you can be held accountable for your decisions. All of that is fine, but you don't wait while someone suffers because you're worried about your own position. She paused. He believed that medical care was unconditional. You help because help is needed, not because you've been given clearance to help. Zeke was quiet for a moment. A wound on a rich man or a pauper, she said, a white man or a man of color, bleeds the exact same red under a surgeon's blade. That was his saying. He had it written on the wall of his field station. Something crossed Zeke's face. Not softness exactly, more like recognition. He treated black soldiers, Zeke said. It wasn't a question. He treated everyone who came through his door. He was brought up before a review board in '63 for it. She held his gaze. He told the board that the medical oath he'd taken made no mention of race, and that he intended to honor that oath in full. They reprimanded him, and he went right back to doing it. Zeke looked at her for a long moment. Then he unlatched the paddock gate and came out and held out his hand. She took it. His grip was firm and brief and entirely genuine. I'll take the morning checks on the 3 recovering horses, he said, so you can get to other things. I'd appreciate that. And I'll want to learn what to look for with the berries. In feed, in water, whatever else they might try. I'll teach you, she said. All of it that's useful to know. He nodded. He picked up his hat from the fence post and put it on. Good, he said, and walked back toward the barn. Ada watched him go. May settled into the valley. The cottonwoods filled out, and the creek dropped back to its normal level, and the foaling mares grew heavy and slow. Ira recovered fully, and was moved back to pasture, where he ran the fence line every morning with his tail up like a flag. The account books were still grim. The debt was still there, now held by a man who intended to use it. The ranch hands worked long days, and the money moved in and out with the particular tightness of a place that had no room for any surprise expense. But the horses were alive. Ada planted more of the kitchen garden on her afternoons. She started keeping a medical log of her own careful notes on the belladonna case, on the treatments, on what worked and what didn't. Her father's journals had told her 100 times that documentation was the first discipline of medicine. If you didn't write it down, the knowledge died with you. She wrote it down, and in the evenings, sometimes, she and Gideon sat at the table in the lamplight and went over the books together. And he talked, and she listened, and she talked, and he listened, and it was not yet easy, and it was not yet much, but it was a conversation between 2 people who had decided, separately and together, to stay. That was enough for May. June was coming, and June would bring its own problems. But the horses were alive, and the ranch was standing, and Gideon had not touched a bottle in 3 weeks, and Zeke Thorne had shaken her hand. Ada Vance, surgeon's daughter, mail-order bride, practical woman, not afraid of hard work or hard weather. She sat in the doorway of the Broken Spur cabin on a May evening and watched the light go golden over the mountains, and she thought, we are still here. That was the whole thing, really. That was all of it. Still here. The man's name was Tomas Runningwater, and he had been working the Broken Spurs fence line since April. He was 23 years old, half Shoshone on his mother's side, and he could string wire faster than any hand Gideon had ever employed. He didn't talk much. He worked hard. He was saving money to bring his younger sister down from the reservation near Fort Washatsaki, where the government rations had been short 2 winters running, and the situation was not improving. Ada knew all of this because she had asked. She had made it a habit learning the names, the circumstances, the small biographies of the people around her. Her father had believed that a physician who didn't know her patients as human beings was only doing half the job. The other half was understanding who they were and what they were carrying before they ever came to you needing help. It was a Tuesday in early June when Tomas's horse threw him. She was in the kitchen garden when it happened, heard the horses scream first, sharp and sudden, then the crash, then nothing. She was already moving. before she'd consciously decided to move, pulling off her garden gloves as she ran toward the eastern pasture. She came over the rise and saw it. The horse was standing 30 yards away, one rein trailing, sides heaving. Tomas was on the ground. He wasn't moving in the way that meant he was unconscious. He was moving in the way that meant he was in too much pain to move voluntarily small, rigid, controlled movements, the kind your body makes when it's trying not to disturb something catastrophic. She crossed the distance in about 10 seconds. She crouched beside him and looked first, didn't touch. His right leg, the angle of his thigh below the knee, was wrong deeply, obviously wrong, the kind of wrong that didn't require medical training to recognize. His trouser leg was already straining at the fabric, the tissue underneath swelling rapidly. "Tomas," she said, "can you hear me?" Yes. His voice was steady, which told her he hadn't lost consciousness. "Good. I need to look at your leg. I'm going to cut the trouser fabric. Don't try to move." She pulled the small folding knife she'd carried in her apron pocket since February, a habit from her father, who had believed in always having a blade within reach, and she cut carefully up the seam of his trouser leg, from the knee upward, peeling the fabric back. The bone had broken through the skin. A compound fracture of the femur, midshaft. The bone was visible, pale against the torn muscles surrounding it, and the bleeding was significant, not arterial. She checked for that immediately, watching the blood flow and confirming it was venous, slower, manageable. But a femur fracture this severe could bleed internally on a massive scale, even when the external wound looked controlled. She had maybe a window here. "Is it bad?" Tomas asked. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the sky above him. "It's a bad break," she said. "I'm going to be honest with you, this needs to be set. I can do it. But I need to get you to somewhere I can work properly. And I need my instruments. Can you do it here? I can start the process here. I need to stabilize you for transport first." She looked up. Zeke was coming across the pasture at a run. Behind him, Gideon's tall figure was visible from the direction of the barn. Zeke reached her first. He looked at the leg, and his face didn't change, but he crouched immediately and said, "What do you need?" "Straight pieces of wood. At least 4 feet long, 2 of them, and whatever you can find to bind them, rope, leather, anything, and a board or a gate we can use as a litter to carry him, and whiskey clean, the highest proof you have." "For the pain?" Zeke said. "For sterilization," she said. "The wound is open. I need to clean it before we move him, or we're fighting infection on top of everything else." Zeke was already standing. Gideon arrived as Zeke left. He took in the scene Tomas on the ground. Ada crouched over him, the leg, and he crouched down on Tomas's other side without saying anything that wasn't useful. "What can I do?" he said. "Hold his shoulders. If he goes into shock, I need to know immediately. Watch his face, his color. If he goes pale very fast or his breathing changes, tell me." She talked to Tomas while she worked, kept a running stream of information, what she was doing, why, what would happen next. Her father had been fierce about this. A patient who knows what's coming can help you. A patient left in the dark fights you, and fighting takes energy they need for healing. She cleaned the wound with the whiskey Zeke brought, flushing it thoroughly, removing the debris she could see, and Thomas made one hard sound through his teeth and then went quiet again. The improvised splints went on either side of the leg, bound at the thigh and below the knee. Not tight enough to compromise circulation, firm enough to prevent the bone from shifting. She checked his distal pulse, the pulse in his foot, below the break, and found it. Present, circulation intact. That was the critical thing with a femur fracture. If the broken bone severed the femoral artery, you lost the leg or you lost the man. They carried him to town on the paddock gate, Gideon and Zeke, and the hand named Davis taking the weight, Ada walking alongside with her hand on the splint, monitoring. The town of Dunmore had one doctor. His name was Wills. He had a proper surgery at the end of the main street, with a painted sign and a glass-fronted cabinet full of instruments. He was 58 years old, and he had, as Ada would later learn, been quietly receiving a monthly retainer from Bart Creed for the past 4 years, in exchange for certain considerations, primarily being unavailable or unhelpful to anyone Creed had a conflict with. She didn't know this yet when she carried Tomas through his door. She would figure it out in the next. Wills came out from his back room at the sound of the door. He looked at the group in his entryway. He looked at Tomas on the improvised litter. He took in the blood-soaked trouser leg, the splints, and Ada's dirt-covered apron. Then he looked at Tomas's face, at the particular brown of his skin, the particular shape of his features. "Take him to the livery," Will said. "They've got a back room." Ada looked at him. "This man has a compound femur fracture," she said. "He needs surgical reduction and traction. Right now, in this room, on that table." "I don't." Twill stopped. He started again. "He has no money." "I don't provide charity surgery." "Then I'll pay," Gideon said behind her. His voice had gone flat and quiet in the particular way it did when he was furious. "It's not about payment," Will said, and now he wasn't bothering to find a better reason. He just looked at Tomas, and his meaning was entirely clear. "I don't treat his kind." The room was very still. Ada straightened up from where she'd been keeping pressure near the wound site. She turned to face Wills fully. She was not a large woman, 5'4", slight through the shoulders, with her dark hair coming loose from its braid, and dirt on her hands, and a blood-soaked apron. She was aware of exactly how she appeared. She didn't care about that right now. "His kind," she repeated. Wills said nothing. "Medicine knows no skin color," Ada said. Her voice was even. Cold. The way very deep water was cold, calm on the surface. Something entirely different underneath. "If you measure a human life as less valuable than a draft horse, then you are the true savages here." The word hit the room like a stone hitting water. Wills's face went red. Behind Ada, two of the local cowboys who'd followed them in from the street, curious at the commotion, drawn by the sight of blood, started make sounds, derisive, low, the kind of sounds men made when they wanted to signal where they stood without having to commit to actual words. Ada didn't look at the cowboys. She turned around away from Wills and looked at Gideon. "Get me to somewhere with a flat table and good light," she said. "I'll do it myself." A pause. A brief one. "The church hall," Gideon said. "Sister Agatha has the key." They found Sister Agatha at the mission school 2 streets over. She was 60 years old, with the kind of face that had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. And when Ada explained the situation, in approximately 30 seconds, the nun handed over the church hall key without a single question and said, "I'll bring my herbs. Come find me when you need the fever remedies. You'll need them by tomorrow." Ada looked at her. "You've treated fractures before," she said. "I've treated everything," Sister Agatha said. 22 years on the frontier. "Go. I'll be there in 10 minutes." The church hall was plain and clean. Long pine tables, good south-facing windows, afternoon light pouring in strong and direct. They laid Tomas on 2 tables pushed together. Ada sent Davis for more whiskey and for the specific things she needed from her trunk back at the ranch. She wrote a list on the back of an envelope she found in her apron pocket, precise and fast: the bone instruments, the silk thread, the carbolic acid, the chloroform. While she waited, she kept Tomas conscious with conversation. She told him what was going to happen. She explained the process clearly. She was going to reduce the fracture, meaning set the bone back into proper alignment. This required traction, which meant controlled pulling force, to bring the broken ends back into position. She would immobilize it, with wooden splints and bindings after. The wound would be closed and cleaned. The pain during the procedure would be severe, which was why she was going to use chloroform. "You've done this before?" Tomas said. "I've assisted in 3 femur reductions," she said. "I've read the surgical literature on 20 more. I know what I'm doing." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That was all. Just okay." She was not going to forget that. Her instruments arrived. Sister Agatha arrived with a basket of herbs and the practical efficiency of a woman who had run a frontier clinic out of necessity for 2 decades. They worked together without any need for lengthy introduction. Ada leading, Sister Agatha anticipating, Gideon and Zeke stationed at specific positions because Ada told them exactly where to stand and what to do. The chloroform went on a cloth, held carefully at the right distance from Tomas's face. The dosage was precise enough to bring him under, not enough to suppress his breathing. Ada monitored his respiration throughout, one finger on his wrist. The reduction itself was brutal work. Femurs were the largest bones in the body, surrounded by the largest muscle group, and those muscles went into spasm when the bone broke, pulling the fragments in different directions. To set the bone, you had to overcome the muscle spasm, which meant sustained, controlled traction, pulling the lower leg in a straight line to bring the fragments into alignment. It took force, it took patience, it took knowing when to pull and when to hold, and when the bone had seated correctly without being able to see it directly. She felt it go into position. She'd read enough, assisted enough, understood the anatomy well enough that she recognized the moment a slight give in the resistance, a shift in the spatial relationship she could feel through her hands. She held the position and said, "Hold here," to Gideon, who was providing counter-traction at the hip, and he held it without moving while she checked the alignment as best she could by palpation and by the angle of the leg. Good. As good as she was going to get without an X-ray, which wouldn't exist in this territory for another 20 years. The wound was cleaned again with carbolic acid thorough, repeated, her father's voice in her head. "You cannot overclean an open wound, Ada. Infection is patient. It waits for your shortcuts." She irrigated until the fluid running from the wound was clear. She removed the small fragments of bone she could safely access. She closed the tissue in layers, the deep muscle first, then the fascia, then the skin with small, even sutures that her father had made her practice on leather for 2 years before he ever let her near living tissue. Then the splints, 4 of them this time, properly constructed, padding at every pressure point, bound in a way that allowed the leg to be monitored for swelling without removing the entire apparatus. She straightened up. Her back ached. Her hands were steady. They were always steady during the work, and then sometimes trembled afterward when the focus released and the body caught up with what it had just done. She pressed them flat against her thighs and waited for the trembling to pass. Tomas was coming out of the chloroform. His eyes were moving under his lids. Sister Agatha was already at his side with a cool cloth. She looked across at Ada and gave a small, measured nod. Professional acknowledgement, one practitioner to another. "Clean work," she said. "Thank you," Ada said, "for everything." "He needs to stay flat for 6 weeks minimum," Sister Agatha said. "Longer if the bone is slow to callus. He can be moved in 3 days if you're careful." "I know the timeline. You'll have fever tonight. Starts around midnight usually. I'll send the willow bark tea and the yarrow. The yarrow is for bleeding prevention and inflammation." "Yes," Sister Agatha looked at her. "You know your herbs. My mother was Polish." She believed in the old remedies alongside the new ones. Sister Agatha smiled. It transformed her face entirely, just for a moment. They moved Tomas to a cot in the church hall's side room. The mission had one, kept for traveling missionaries or the sick, and Ada sat with him while the chloroform wore off fully. The fever came at midnight, right on schedule. She managed it through the night with Sister Agatha's preparations and cool water, and the particular vigilance of a person who knew that the surgery was only half the work. News traveled in a small frontier town the way fire traveled in dry grass. By morning, the story of what had happened in Dr. Wills's doorway was known to most of Dunmore, and by afternoon it had reached the outlying ranches and the mining camps north of the ridge. The unlicensed female doctor, who had performed surgery in the church hall, the Shoshone ranch hand, who had walked, or rather, would walk again. The town doctor, who had turned a bleeding man away because of his skin. Ada didn't hear most of it. She was occupied with monitoring Tomas through his recovery and managing the ranch's regular needs, alongside Gideon, who had come to help without being asked every morning for a week. But people started coming to her. The first one appeared 3 days after Tomas's surgery, a woman from one of the small farms east of the ranch, with a child who had an infected finger that was tracking red up toward the hand. Ada cleaned it, lanced the abscess, instructed the mother on how to dress it daily, and what signs meant she needed to come back immediately. She accepted no payment. Then a miner with a badly set broken wrist that was healing wrong. Then an elderly Shoshone man whose wife sent a nephew to find the woman a doctor because the elder had a chest that rattled when he breathed and the town doctor had not been interested. Ada came to him because he couldn't come to her. She went with her bag and her father's instruments, and she spent 2 hours with the elder and his family, and she learned more about the winter fever that was moving through the encampment than any amount of book study could have told her. She showed the nephew, a serious young man of about 20, how to recognize the signs of pneumonia versus ordinary cold, and what the positioning was that helped a compromised chest breathe more easily, and when something had moved beyond what herbs and positioning could manage. She came back to the ranch as the sun went down, with dried venison tied to her saddle as payment she hadn't requested, and Gideon met her at the barn door. He looked at the venison. "You've been at the Shoshone camp," he said, "all afternoon." She dismounted and began unsaddling. "There's a chest illness moving through. I've seen 4 cases now, counting the elder." He took the saddle from her without being asked. "You're building a practice," he said. "I'm building something." She rubbed the horse down, thinking. "I'm not charging for most of it, but I'm keeping records, and some of them want to pay the miners especially. I'm going to start accepting what people can give and keeping a proper ledger." He hung the saddle over the rail. "That's income," he said. "For you. For the ranch if we need it." She looked at him. "And for medicine supplies. We're going to run out of carbolic acid by August if I keep going at this rate." He was quiet for a moment. "There's going to be pushback," he said. "From Wills, possibly from others. I know. A woman practicing medicine without a license in Wyoming territory is technically not prohibited," she said. "There's no licensing law in this territory yet. Wills practices by custom, not by statute." She'd looked into this. She'd spent an evening in the church hall's small library, going through every territorial ordinance she could find. He has no legal ground to stand on. Gideon looked at her in the fading light. "You researched that before you started." "Of course I did." He shook his head slowly. There was something in his expression that hadn't been there in February, or even in March. Something that was still learning what it was, but was moving in a specific direction. "All right," he said. "Then we handle the pushback when it comes." It came sooner than she expected. The following Sunday, after the church service that the Dunmore community used as its weekly gathering point, 3 of the town's prominent women, whose husbands did business with Creed's trading operation, found Ada at the general store and expressed their concern, loudly, with an audience. Their concerns were various and creatively assembled. An unlicensed woman practicing surgery was dangerous to the community. She was encouraging the Indians to distrust proper doctors. She was setting herself above her station. And what did her husband think of her gallivanting around the county doing men's work? Ada listened to all of it. She let them finish. She put her purchases on the counter and turned to face them. "Tomas Runningwater is walking on his own leg," she said. "He came to Dr. Wills's door bleeding, and Dr. Wills sent him away." "I didn't." She looked at each of them in turn. "The people I treat are people your doctor has decided aren't worth his time. I intend to keep treating them." She picked up her parcels. "As for what my husband thinks," she said, "he thinks the same thing I do, that a human life is not made less valuable by how much money it carries or what it looks like." She left the store. Outside, leaning against the hitching post with his arms folded, was Zeke. He'd heard all of it through the open door. He fell into step beside her without comment. They walked down the main street together in the June heat. "You're going to make enemies," he said. "I already have enemies. Creed, Wills, half the town council." She shifted her parcels to her other arm. "At least these ones I've earned by doing something useful." He was quiet for half a block. "That speech you made," he said, "in the store." "Yes. About lives being worth the same regardless." He looked straight ahead. "People around here aren't used to hearing that said out loud. They should be. Maybe." He paused. "They will be if you keep saying it." She looked at him sideways. "I intend to keep saying it," she said. He nodded once. The small definitive nod she'd come to recognize as Zeke's way of closing a subject he'd decided he agreed with. Tomas came back to the broken spur in the 3rd week of June, moving on a crutch, his legs splinted. He wasn't ready to work yet. He knew he wasn't ready. But he came back, and he sat in the shade of the barn, and sharpened tools, and mended leather, and did the seated work that wanted doing. Because sitting at the church mission while the ranch was short-handed was not something he was prepared to continue. Ada checked his leg twice a week. The bone was healing. Slowly, the way femurs always healed. They were heavy bones, carrying tremendous daily load, and they needed time. She'd told him 6 weeks minimum. She revised that to 10, watching the progress. He took this without complaint, just nodded and asked what he could do with his hands while the leg finished. She taught him to dress minor wounds while he sat there. She showed him the basic principles of wound cleaning, why you worked outward from the center, why you needed to see clear fluid before you stopped, why you never probed a wound with an unclean instrument. He was a quick learner, methodical, absorbed information the way certain people absorbed it, all the way in, no part left on the surface. You should keep learning this, she told him one afternoon. After the leg heals, he looked up from the bandaging practice she'd set him. There's no school for it, he said. Not that would take me. No, she said, but I'm here, and I'll teach anyone who wants to learn. He was quiet for a moment. Why? He said. Because knowledge doesn't belong to anyone, she said. My father paid for his education. His teacher paid for his before that. But the knowledge itself, what to do when someone is bleeding, how to manage fever, when a bone is set correctly, that was learned from patients, from people who suffered so that surgeons could understand something. It belongs back to people. She looked at him. It should travel as far as it can. He looked at the bandage in his hands. Your father again? He said. Mostly my mother that time, she said. She believed that knowledge was the one thing you could give away and still keep. He considered this. Smart woman, he said. The same words Sister Agatha had used, the same tone. Yes, Ada said. She was. The summer deepened. Tomas healed. The mares foaled both healthy, both strong, a bay filly and a gray colt that Gideon spent 3 evenings just watching from the fence rail. The kitchen garden produced more than the two of them could eat, and Ada began sending the surplus to Sister Agatha's mission school. The accounts were still tight. The debt to Creed was still hanging. There had been no further obvious sabotage, but Zeke kept watch on the barn now, and the feed was checked before it went to the horses, and nothing was left unlocked that didn't need to be. Ada's medical ledger had 14 entries by the end of June. 8 of them had generated some payment coin, produce, labor, once a beautifully made knife that she had no use for and gave to Gideon, who received it without comment and put it on the shelf above the fireplace, where it sat next to the 5 silver dollars she had never taken back. She noticed the dollars still there every morning. She never said anything about them. He never moved them. The summer was not easy, but the ranch was standing. And the horses were growing, and the people Ada had helped were carrying what she'd given them, the knowledge, the care, the blunt insistence that they were worth helping, and they were carrying it outward further than she could see. Her father had said once, near the end of his life, that medicine was a river. You could dam it and control it and try to own it, but water found its way. It always found its way through. She thought about that in the evenings, sitting on the step of the cabin in the long Wyoming twilight. The river was finding its way. She was going to make sure it kept moving. The door was at the top of the stairs. Ada had walked past it 100 times without thinking much about it. The Broken Spurs main house was not large a ground floor, with the main room, the kitchen corner, the curtained sleeping area, and then a narrow staircase along the north wall that led to a single room above. Gideon used the space for storage. She'd assumed that from the beginning because the door was always closed, and he'd never mentioned it, and there were boxes visible through the gap at the bottom. She had never tried the handle. She was not by nature a woman who opened doors that weren't hers to open. But in mid-July, with Gideon out surveying the south fence and Zeke at the livestock market in Dunmore, she was looking for the spare wool blankets she needed for the mission school donations Sister Agatha had requested. She'd checked the chest in the main room, the cabinet in the kitchen corner, the space under the bed. She went up the stairs. The handle turned. The room was dim. The single window on the west wall shuttered against the July heat. She pushed the shutters open to let in light and stood in the doorway, and she looked. It was not a storage room. It had been. At some point there were indeed boxes along one wall, crates of old tools and tack, and the general accumulation of a working ranch. But the center of the room was something else entirely. There was a small vanity table, feminine and out of place, its mirror tilted back and filmed with dust. A chair with carved legs, delicate, the kind of chair that had never been made for ranch work. A cedar wardrobe against the far wall, the doors closed. A wooden jewelry box on the vanity, the clasp tarnished to black, and on the vanity's surface, undisturbed in what looked like years, a woman's hairbrush, a small glass perfume bottle, and a pair of white gloves folded one over the other. Ada stood in the doorway for a long moment. She was not a woman who frightened easily, but the room had a particular quality to it, the preserved stillness of a place that had been closed up rather than cleared out, which were entirely different things. You cleared out a room when you were finished with it. You closed it up when you weren't ready to be. She crossed to the vanity. She picked up the perfume bottle. There was still something in it. She could feel the liquid weight when she tilted it. She didn't open it. She set it back in the precise ring it had made in the dust. The jewelry box she did open. Small things inside, a cameo brooch, a ribbon the color of old roses, a pair of earrings with pale blue stones, a folded letter, the paper yellowed at the edges. She didn't read the letter. She closed the box. The wardrobe she opened last. Inside, 3 dresses, hung carefully, the fabric protected with cedar blocks. They were expensive dresses. Not frontier practical, real city dresses, with tight bodices and draped skirts, and the kind of construction that spoke of department stores in Denver or St. Louis. The colors were vivid, even after years in a closed wardrobe. Deep burgundy, peacock blue, a cream silk that had gone slightly ivory with age. Ada reached out and touched the sleeve of the burgundy dress. Then she pulled her hand back and closed the wardrobe. She stood in the center of that room and thought about what she was looking at. A man who said his wife was dead. A room kept locked, but not cleared. Expensive things preserved in cedar, as though someone might come back for them. She went back downstairs without the blankets. She stood in the main room for a moment, looking at the stairs. Then she went back to her medical ledger and picked up where she'd left off, because whatever was in that room was Gideon's to explain when he was ready to explain it. She was going to have to be patient. She was not, historically, a patient person. But she had learned since February that patience was a skill, not a temperament. And like any skill, it improved with deliberate practice. She practiced it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she couldn't anymore. It was evening. Gideon was at the table going over accounts. The lamp was lit. Outside, the sky had gone the particular deep blue of a Wyoming midsummer evening. The horizon still faintly orange in the west. It was a good evening. A quiet one. The kind of evening that had been slowly becoming familiar over the last few months. The two of them in the same room, doing separate work, in a companionable silence that had taken a long time to build. She sat down across from him. She didn't preamble. "I found the room at the top of the stairs," she said. His pen stopped moving. The stillness that came over him was different from his usual contained quiet. This was a harder stillness, braced. "I was looking for blankets," she said. The door wasn't locked. He set the pen down. He did not look up from the accounts page. "I didn't read anything," she said. "I opened the wardrobe." She paused. "Those are not a dead woman's things, Gideon." The lamp flame moved in a draft from somewhere. "No," he said. "Flat, just the one word." "She left them," Ada said. "Not a question." He heard that. He closed the accounts book. He put both hands flat on the cover and looked at them, the scarred, broad hands of a man who'd been working with them since before he was grown, and was quiet, long enough that she thought he might simply refuse to continue. Then he said, "Her name is Loretta." Ada waited. "We married in '72. He kept his eyes on his hands. "She came out here from St. Louis with me when I bought the ranch. She hated it from the start, the isolation, the work, the winters. I knew that. I thought she'd come around." A pause. "I was wrong. What happened?" "The ranch hit hard times in '75. A bad winter lost 3 horses. The note came due, and I didn't have it. I went to the bank." He stopped. "And somewhere in that same month, while I was trying to keep us from losing everything, she was making different arrangements." "Creed," Ada said. His head came up. He looked at her. "She left with him," he said. "Took the savings, what was left of it. $400 I'd kept in the house." His jaw tightened. "I told people she died. I told Zeke she died. I told the agency that placed your advertisement that I was a widower." He held her gaze now, not looking away from it. Because saying the truth that she chose a wealthier man and walked out and took my money was something I couldn't manage to say out loud. Ada was quiet. Shame, she said. Yes. And she's still with Creed. Yes. She sat with this. She turned it over, examined it the way she examined everything, looking for the structure of it, the mechanism, what it meant for what came next. A woman named Loretta, alive, in Dunmore or near it, living with the man who was trying to take the broken spur. An ex-wife who knew the ranch's layout, its finances, its vulnerabilities, who had walked out with $400 that had never come back. And a man across from her who had carried this for 3 years sealed up in a room with cedar moths and a tarnished jewelry box, and had told himself and everyone else a simpler story because the true one was too humiliating to speak. She understood the instinct. She genuinely did. But she was also angry. You should have told me, she said. I know, before I came out here, or when I arrived, or at any point in the last 5 months. She kept her voice, even because anger, in her experience, was most effective when it was quiet. I came here to be your partner. I've been doing the work of a partner, and there is a woman alive in this county who is legally married to you, which means our arrangement is. She stopped. He looked at her. She filed for divorce, he said quickly. In April of '76, it went through the county court. I have the papers. He opened the desk drawer and pulled them out. He knew exactly where they were, which told her he'd thought about this moment more than once. He laid them on the table between them. She looked at the papers. She read enough to confirm what he'd said. Loretta Ann Sterling, divorce granted on grounds of abandonment, April 12, 1876. She pushed them back. All right, she said. That part is resolved. The other part isn't. I know, he said again. A lie isn't just a word, Gideon. It's a structure. You build your life around it, and it shapes everything. What you tell people, what you hide, what you think you're protecting yourself from. She looked at him directly. And the problem with a structure built on a lie is that when it starts to give way, it doesn't give way slowly. It collapses. He was listening, really listening. She could tell the particular quality of attention that meant a person wasn't just waiting for you to finish. I can live alongside a poor man, she said. I've been doing that since February, and I don't have a single complaint about the poverty. But I will not work beside a coward who hides like a ghost inside his own lies. The word landed. She'd meant it to. Not cruelly. She wasn't being cruel, but precisely. Her father had believed in calling things what they were, not to wound, but to clarify. A wound you couldn't name, you couldn't treat. A thing you couldn't say out loud, you couldn't begin to address. Gideon said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, You're right. She hadn't expected him to fold that quickly. She'd been prepared for defensiveness, for the particular anger that men sometimes produced when they felt cornered. She'd been ready to hold her ground through it. He just looked at her and said, You're right, and meant it. Something in the room shifted. The lie about Loretta, he said slowly, was the easy version of a harder truth. The harder truth is that I picked wrong, and I trusted wrong, and she walked out anyway. And if I said that out loud, then I'd have to admit I was the kind of man a woman left. He paused, and I'd already been left by enough things that I didn't have room for one more. Ada thought about this. What else has left you, she said. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Men I was responsible for, he said finally. In the war, scouting missions I made calls, and some of them were wrong, and men died from it. I've been carrying that since '64. He stopped. Loretta, leaving, felt like confirmation, like evidence. Of what? That I was the kind of man things left. She looked at him across the table. At the hard face she'd studied since February, the weathered lines of it, the gray eyes that kept everything back, the jaw that tightened when he was feeling something he didn't intend to show. She thought about the man who had treated her frostbite correctly in the dark, who had set her money on the mantelpiece, who had said the word partner and meant it, who had not touched a bottle in nearly 2 months. You need to hear something, she said. He waited. The men who died on those scouting missions, she said. I don't know what calls you made. I don't know whether they were right or wrong, but I know this, a man who made bad calls and felt nothing would not still be carrying it 15 years later. The carrying is evidence of conscience, not evidence of worthlessness. He looked at her. And Loretta leaving, she said. That was a choice she made about what she valued. Comfort over commitment. Wealth over whatever you were building out here. That's information about her character, not about your worth. She folded her hands on the table. You are not responsible for what other people choose. You are responsible for what you choose. The lamp flame moved again. You sound like your father, he said. My father said it better, she said. He used to say that the diagnosis was never the end of the story. It was just the beginning of actually understanding what you were working with. He turned that over. So, he said carefully, what are we working with? A ranch in debt, she said. A real enemy in Creed, who has your ex-wife and your money and apparently your banknote. A room upstairs full of things that need to be cleared out because keeping them isn't preserving anything useful. It's just keeping the wound open. She paused. And a marriage that was built on paper in August of last year and has been built on honest work since February and could stand to be built on honest conversation too. He was quiet. The room, he said. I'll clear it. I'll help if you want, she said. Or I won't if you'd rather do it alone. I'll do it alone, he said. She nodded. He cleared it the next morning before she woke up. She heard him on the stairs before dawn, heard the sounds of crates being moved, the careful work of a man doing something he'd put off too long. When she came out to make coffee, he was carrying the cedar wardrobe down the stairs by himself, an extraordinary feat of stubborn physical effort. And she held the door open without a word, and he carried it out to the barn, and she didn't ask what he intended to do with it. By mid-morning, the room was empty. He'd left the window shutters open. Fresh air moved through. He came and stood beside her in the kitchen corner, where she was working on the medical ledger, and he set the small glass perfume bottle on the table beside her records. This was her mother's, he said. I don't know if there's someone to send it to. I don't know her family. Sister Agatha might know, Ada said, if Loretta has any connection to the mission or the church community. She doesn't, he said, but someone at the mission might know someone who does. He paused. It should go back to her family eventually. It's not mine and it's not Loretta's anymore. Ada looked at the perfume bottle. I'll take it to Sister Agatha next week, she said. He nodded. He started to move away, then stopped. Ada, he said. She looked up. The things I told you last night, he said. About the war. About the rest of it. He was looking at the window, not at her. I haven't said any of that out loud before. To anyone. She waited. I don't know what to do with that, he said. You don't have to do anything with it, she said. It's just the truth. It's just what happened. It already happened. It's in the past. It can't be changed. What you do from here is what matters. She looked back at her ledger. That's what my father used to say about the men he couldn't save. That grief was appropriate and necessary, and then at some point you had to pick up the instruments and go back to work, because there were still people who needed you. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back outside. He came back for lunch and for dinner, and the evening was different from the evenings before it. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to an outsider. But the particular quality of his silences had changed. The braced, lidded quality was loosened some. He ate without the distracted inward focus that had become so familiar. She'd almost stopped noticing it. He was present, more than usual. The weeks that followed had their own difficulties, they always did, but something had moved between them quietly. The way furniture moves when you rearrange a room. The space was the same. What was in it was different, Zeke noticed. He didn't say anything, but Ada caught him watching them at the supper table. One evening, the three of them ate together, most nights now, along with Tomas and the other hands, and there was a look on Zeke's face that she could only describe as carefully satisfied, like a man watching something he'd been hoping for come true. August arrived, and with it came Loretta, not to the ranch. Ada heard about it first from Sister Agatha, who had heard it from the woman who ran the Dunmore post office, who had seen it with her own eyes, Loretta Sterling, now known as Loretta Creed, though the marriage had been a private arrangement and the legality of it was murky, arriving on the Tuesday coach from Cheyenne in a dress that cost more than most families in Dunmore spent on food in a year. Ada took this information and filed it. in the category of things she was monitoring. Gideon heard it from Zeke the same afternoon, and his reaction was more controlled than Ada had expected, a slight tightening around the eyes, and then nothing, a deliberate setting aside of it. She watched this happen and thought about what he'd said the night of the unlocked room. "I'm the kind of man things left." He was working on that. She could see him working on it. "She's come because Creed has a plan moving," Zeke said, at supper that night. He served himself beans and looked at Gideon. "Loretta goes where the money is. She's here because she smells the land transfer coming. Then we make sure the land transfer doesn't come," Ada said. "We're 2 payments behind on the note," Gideon said. "I know. I've been looking at that." She'd been looking at it for 2 weeks. "We have the gray Colt Zeke. What did Peterson offer in June? $350 for him now. More if we wait until next spring." "We can't wait until spring." She looked at Gideon and the hay harvest the Johnson brothers offered to buy our surplus. "That's another 100 if we get the north field cut before the month ends." "Can we get it cut?" Zeke and Gideon looked at each other. "If everyone works the weekend," Zeke said. "Then everyone works the weekend," Ada said. "I'll work it too." Gideon looked at her. "That's only 450, he said. "We're short 2 payments of 300 each." "I know." She opened the medical ledger. "I have accounts outstanding people who promised payment in goods or labor, but haven't delivered. Tomas, you remember the Heller brothers saying they'd haul timber?" Tomas, sitting at the end of the table and fully weight-bearing now, 3 months after the surgery, looked up from his plate, said it twice. "Never asked me to hold them to it." "Hold them to it," Ada said. "That's 100 in labor value." She turned a page. "Sister Agatha has been paying me in mission supplies, medical things. If she can pay in coin instead for the next 2 months." She stopped. "That's not enough. We're still short." The table was quiet. "There's one more thing," Ada said. She closed the ledger. "I want to start seeing patients formally, not just ranch hands in mission cases. A regular practice with set hours in the church hall if Sister Agatha will allow it. Proper fees for those who can pay them." "Wills will object," Gideon said. "Wills has been objecting to my existence since June. He hasn't found legal grounds yet, and I don't believe he will." She looked around the table. "People have been coming to me for 4 months. There's demand. I can generate real income from it. There'll be more than just wills," Zeke said. "Creed will use it. He'll find some way to make it a problem." "Everything we do, Creed will find a way to make a problem," Ada said. "I'd rather do something worth attacking than nothing at all." Zeke looked at Gideon. Gideon looked at Ada. "Do it," he said. She sent a letter to Sister Agatha the next morning. The reply came back in 2 days. Yes. The church hall was available Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and Saturday mornings. Sister Agatha would manage the appointments herself, as she put it, as both a practical and theological matter. Ada started the following Tuesday. By the end of the first week, she had seen 11 patients. 3 of them paid in coin, genuine coin, not a token amount, but real fees, a miner's wife with a persistent ear infection, a ranch owner from east of town with a hand that hadn't healed properly from a burn, an older man whose cough had been dismissed by wills for 6 months and turned out to be a manageable condition with proper treatment. The income was modest. It was real. It went into the household accounts under Ada's careful handwriting. And for the first time since she'd started reading those accounts in February, the numbers on the right side of the ledger were growing. Gideon came to the church hall on the Saturday of the 3rd week. She didn't know he was coming. She was between patients. A young woman had just left, the wife of one of the mining camp workers, who Ada suspected was being hurt at home, and who she had treated for bruising without pushing too hard yet, planting a seed of trust she intended to cultivate carefully when she came out of the side room and found Gideon sitting on the bench in the hall's entry, hat in his hands. "Everything all right?" she said. "Fine." He looked up. "Just came to see it." She looked at him. "The room," he said. "What you're doing in it?" She gestured at the hall. The pine tables pushed to the side, her instruments laid out on a clean cloth, the medical ledger open, the list of patients Sister Agatha kept at the door. "This is it," she said. He looked at all of it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You built this," he said. "In 2 months. We're all building it." She sat down on the bench beside him. You let me use the ranch as a base to work from? Zeke covered the horse checks when I needed to be here. Tomas told the mining camp men where to find me. She paused. It's not just me. He turned his hat in his hands. Ada, he said. She waited. I want to clear something up, he said. From before. From the night of the room. She waited. I should have told you the truth about Loretta before you came here, he said. The agency, the advertisement, all of it was built on a lie I'd told myself so many times. I'd almost stopped knowing it was a lie. He looked at her. You came out here in good faith. You deserved the same from me from the beginning. You've given it since, she said. That's not the same as giving it from the start. She considered this. No, she said. It isn't the same. You're right about that, she met his eyes. But I've found that people generally start being honest at the point when they're ready to, not before. Pushing earlier than that gets you performed honesty, which is worse than silence. He absorbed this. You're very hard to apologize to, he said. She almost laughed. My mother would agree with you. He did smile then, a real one, rare enough that it still surprised her a little each time. It moved across his face and changed it, opened something in the angles of it. There's something else, he said. Tell me. Loretta is going to come here eventually, to the ranch, or to wherever she can find me. Creed uses her for things she knows me, knows how I think, knows what bothers me. He paused. I want you to know that before she comes, not after. I want you to know it from me. What does she do? Ada said. She's very good, he said carefully, at finding the places where things are fragile and pressing on them. She has a talent for it. He looked down at his hat. She knows about the war. She knows about the guilt. She would use it when she wanted something. Remind me of what I'd done, or what I'd failed to do, until I stopped pushing back. He paused. I won't let that happen now, but I wanted you to know what she was likely to try. Ada sat with this for a moment. Thank you for telling me, she said. She's going to come after you too, he said. She'll see you as a target. Let her, Ada said. He looked at her. I've been called an unlicensed woman playing at men's work since June, Ada said. By the town council wives, by Wills, by half a dozen cowboys who wandered past the church hall on patient days and felt the need to comment. She folded her hands in her lap. I'm still here, still treating people. The comments changed nothing. She looked at him. What Loretta has to say about me will change nothing either. He was quiet. You're not afraid of her, he said. I don't know her well enough to be afraid of her yet, Ada said. What I know is that she made choices that brought her to where she is, and I've made choices that brought me to where I am. She glanced around the church hall, at the instruments, on the clean cloth, and the ledger, and the list of names at the door. I prefer where I am. He followed her gaze around the room. So do I, he said. Quiet, meaning it. They sat there for a moment on the bench in the church hall. August light coming through the south windows. The sounds of Dunmore's Saturday morning moving outside. Not a dramatic moment, not a declaration. Just two people sitting beside each other, understanding something. Then Ada stood up because her next patient was due, and Gideon stood too and put his hat on. I'll ride back ahead, he said. The Gray Colts Farrier appointment is this afternoon. I'll be back by 4, she said. He nodded and went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at her once, just once, briefly, and then he went out into the August street. Ada turned back to her instruments. She checked the arrangement of them, the order, the cleanliness. Her father had taught her that the preparation before a patient arrived was as important as the treatment itself. It told the patient they were expected. It told them they mattered enough to prepare for. She straightened the scalpel handles. She checked the carbolic acid bottle. Loretta was coming. Creed was moving. The note was still 2 payments behind, and the money was still short, and the whole fragile structure of what they'd built the ranch. Ranch, the practice, the honest conversation begun in earnest only a month ago was going to be tested in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. She knew all of this. She picked up her ledger and opened it to the next blank page. A new patient was at the door. She went to meet them. The last week of September came in cold. Not winter cold, yet that was still 6 weeks away, but the particular cold of a Wyoming autumn that reminded you every morning what was coming. Frost on the grass before dawn. Ice in the water troughs that had to be broken by hand. The horses growing their winter coats. The hay consumption going up. the days shortening in a way that felt personal. Ada had spent the month of September running the medical practice 3 days a week, and the ranch work the other 4. Her patient ledger had grown to 41 entries. She had 9 regular patients, people who came back, people managing chronic conditions that needed monitoring. The income was steady now, not large but real, and it had helped close one of the 2 missed payments on the note. One payment remained outstanding. Creed knew this, of course he knew. The bank reported to him now, or someone at the bank did. Zeke had confirmed it through a conversation at the feed store with a man who worked the bank's courier route. They were being watched, financially, the way a hawk watched a field mouse patient, elevated, waiting for the moment to drop. Gideon had ridden to the bank twice in September to negotiate. Both times he came back with the same answer. The note terms were non-negotiable. Full payment of the outstanding balance, plus interest by the 1st of October, or Creed, as the notes holder, had grounds to call the entirety of the debt. It was now the 28th of September. 3 days left. The money they had was not enough. They'd sold the gray Colt $350, as Zeke had predicted. The hay surplus had gone to the Johnson brothers. Ada's practice income for September had been added in. They had come up with $1,012 and against a total outstanding debt of $1,400, $388 short. Gideon had been riding the south fence that afternoon, checking the line before the weather turned. When the riders appeared on the ranch road, Ada was in the barn. She had been there since 2 o'clock, working with the pregnant mares. Both had foaled in the spring and were cycling again, and she was monitoring their condition going into the winter breeding season. She heard hoofbeats on the road and looked out through the barn's open door and counted the horses. 8 riders. In the middle of them, on a black horse that cost more than most men in Wyoming made in a year, was a man she recognized from the description she'd been given a dozen times without ever meeting him directly. Bartholomew Creed. He was not what she'd expected, and completely what she'd expected at the same time. Big through the chest, thick-necked, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone whose no he respected. He wore a good wool coat, despite the fact that it wasn't truly cold enough for it yet. The coat was making a point. Behind him, on a bay mare, was Loretta. Ada had seen Loretta exactly once before, across the street in Dunmore in August. She had not seen her face clearly then. She saw it clearly now as the group came into the yard, a handsome face, sharp-featured, framed by dark hair, pinned elaborately under a hat that belonged in a Denver parlor, not a Wyoming ranch yard. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, velvet, impractical in every conceivable way, for the mud and the smell of horses. She wore it like armor. She was looking at the ranch with an expression that Ada could only read as cataloging, assessing, tallying, the look of someone who had come to verify what they expected to take. Ada set down her work and walked out of the barn. Zeke came out of the bunkhouse at the same moment. Davis appeared from the direction of the hayfield. Tomas, who was fully mobile now and back on regular duty, came around from the north side of the barn. They converged on the yard without any signal passing between them, arriving the way people arrived when they'd spent months working together and had developed a shared instinct about when presence mattered. Creed pulled up in the center of the yard. His men fanned out behind him. 8 men, and 6 of them had the look of hired muscle rather than working cowboys, the deliberate stillness of men being paid to stand somewhere and be large. "Mrs. Sterling," Creed said. He looked at Ada with the particular pleasantness of a man who was about to do something unpleasant. "Your husband around?" "He's on the range," Ada said. "What can I do for you?" Creed reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it out without moving toward her, making her come to it or not. She walked across the yard and took it from his hand. She unfolded it and read it. A mortgage note, the Broken Spur Ranch, legal description of the property in full, the original lending bank's seal at the top, and below it the transfer of ownership of the note to one Bartholomew Creed, dated 6 weeks ago. the outstanding balance, the missed payments, and at the bottom, a demand clause. Full payment within 48 hours of this notice, or the note would be called in its entirety. She read the whole thing. She read it carefully, the way her father had taught her to read everything that mattered not for the general shape of it, but for every specific word, because the words were what bound you. The 48-hour notice, she said. When does it start? Creed smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I'm generous. Call it now. She folded the document. My husband will be back before evening, she said. He'll want to speak with you directly. He can speak with my attorney, Creed said. I've said what I came to say. He looked around the yard at the barn, the bunkhouse, the house, the horses in the paddock. The look of a man taking inventory of what was about to be his, fine piece of property. Shame what's happened to it. Loretta had said nothing yet. She sat on her bay mare with her gloved hands folded on the pommel and looked at Ada with an expression that was harder to read curiosity in it, and something that might have been assessment, the same cataloging quality she'd applied to the ranch, but more personal. You're the mail-order bride, Loretta said. Her voice was level, almost pleasant, the pleasantness of a woman who had learned to keep everything she was actually thinking out of her voice. Ada Sterling, Ada said. Loretta looked at her work clothes, the practical dark skirt, and the heavy boots and the apron she hadn't taken off, at her hands which were not clean, at her hair, which had come loose from its braid 2 hours ago, and she hadn't stopped to fix it. He always did prefer practical women, Loretta said. There was something in it that was shaped like a compliment, and wasn't one. Dust suits you. Ada looked at her for a moment. Velvet's impractical in a barnyard, Ada said. But I suppose you know your own purposes. Something moved across Loretta's face. Quick, then gone. Creed had been watching this exchange with the faint amusement of a man who considered women's conversations a minor entertainment. He turned his horse back toward the road. 48 hours, Mrs. Sterling, he said. I'd start packing. He rode out. His men rode with him. Loretta went last, and she looked back once from the edge of the yard, not at the house or the barn, but at Ada, directly, a long look that Ada returned without moving. Then they were gone. The yard was quiet. Zeke came to stand beside Ada. He looked at the document in her hand. How bad? He said. 48 hours, she said. Full payment, or they call the note. He said something low and precise under his breath that she chose not to hear specifically. He can't do it legally in 48 hours, she said. There's a process. The county court has to... She stopped. Who's the county judge? Man named Porter, Zeke said. Has dinner at Creed's house twice a month? She looked down at the document. All right, she said. Then we assume the process will go as fast as Creed wants it to. She went to find paper and her pen. She sat down at the table inside and wrote out their actual financial position in full, every dollar they had, every outstanding account in the medical ledger, every asset that could theoretically be converted in 48 hours. She was still writing when hoofbeats came fast up the ranch road. Gideon came through the door with the cold coming off him and his jaw set in a way that told her someone had reached him on the range with word. She handed him the document. He read it. He put it down on the table and looked at the numbers she'd written. 388, short, he said. At minimum, more if they add penalty fees. He pulled out the chair and sat down heavily. He looked at the paper for a long time. She could see what he was doing, going through the same mental inventory she'd gone through, looking at every asset, every option, running the numbers the way you ran them, when you were hoping they'd come out different on the third try. They didn't come out different. The stallion, he said. Ira, you'd get 300 for him on short notice, maybe. Not enough, and you lose the breeding income for next year. The south pasture, I could offer it as collateral. To who? The bank is Creed's. There's no lender in this county who isn't connected to him. He leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. She watched him. She was thinking about something she hadn't said yet, an idea that had been forming since she'd read the document in the yard that she'd been turning over in the hour since. I want to write letters tonight, she said. He looked at her. To everyone in my medical ledger, she said. Everyone I've treated. Not asking for money, I want to be clear about that. I want to tell them what's happening and let them decide. She paused. People who've been helped by something tend to want to help it continue. I've seen that. I've seen it in the way they come back and bring their neighbors and tell the miners at the camp about the Thursday clinic. Ada, I know it might not be enough, she said. I know we might write 40 letters tonight and get nothing back in time. I know that. She looked at him. But it is the one thing I haven't tried yet, and it's the one thing I can do right now. So I'm going to do it. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. They wrote letters until midnight. Gideon sealed and addressed each one. Zeke appeared at 9 o'clock and took the stack that was finished and rode out to deliver what he could reach that night: the closer farms, the mining camp, the mission. The others would go by post in the morning. Then they slept. Or tried to. Ada woke at 3 in the morning. She wasn't sure what woke her: a sound, a smell, some instinct that pulled her up from sleep before her conscious mind had identified what triggered it. She lay still in the dark for 2 seconds listening. Then she smelled it. Smoke. She was out of bed before the word had finished forming. She pulled on her boots without lacing them, grabbed her coat, and went through the curtain into the main room. Gideon was already at the window. The barn was on fire, not starting to burn. Burning flames already moving up the north wall, orange light throwing itself across the yard, the wood dry from the summer and the autumn, catching with a speed that told her it hadn't started by accident. Fire moved through dry wood fast. Fire moved faster when someone had helped it along. The mares, she said. Gideon was already at the door. Stay, he started. She was already past him. She heard him behind her as she crossed the yard, heard him shouting. For Zeke heard the bunkhouse door bang open. The heat from the barn reached her at 20 yards, a wall of it, physical. The kind of heat that pressed against your face and made your eyes water. The horses were screaming. That was the thing she would remember later, not the flames, not the heat, but the sound of the horses. High and wild and desperate, the sound of large animals in a small space with fire, a sound that bypassed thought and went straight to something older. She went in through the side door. The north wall was fully involved. The flames hadn't reached the stall row yet, but the smoke was thick, low, and acrid, moving fast across the ceiling in a rolling black layer. She went down the center aisle in a crouch, under the smoke, one hand on the stall doors. The mares were in the last 2 stalls on the south end. She'd put them there in September because the south end was quieter, and the pregnant mares needed quiet. Right now it meant they were farthest from the fire, but also farthest from the door. She unlatched the first stall. The mare came out in a controlled panic, not fully wild yet, still responding to a human presence, trained enough to follow the pull of the lead rope even through the terror. Ada got the rope on her and moved her fast toward the door, one hand over the mare's eyes. You moved a horse through smoke the same way. You moved a person, you blocked the worst of what they could see, and you kept them moving forward. She got the mare to the door. Zeke was there. He took the rope without a word, and Ada went back in. The second mare was harder. She'd been more frightened by the time Ada reached her, the smoke thicker now, the roar of the fire louder as it moved along the ceiling joists. Ada got the stall open, and the mare moved away from her, pressing into the far corner the way animals did when they were beyond reason, choosing the familiar corner over the unknown door, even when the door was the only safe option. Ada went in after her. She got her arms around the mare's neck, all her weight pulling forward. Talking low and continuous, she had no idea what she was saying. Just sound, just human voice, and eventually the animal's instinct to follow something. Living overrode the instinct to freeze, and she moved. They came out of the stall together. Above them, a ceiling joist cracked. The burning timber came down across a center aisle, not where they were standing, 3 feet ahead of them, but close enough that the impact threw burning fragments and the concussion of it knocked Ada sideways into the stall wall. The mare screamed and pulled free and ran for the door on her own, which was fine, which was exactly what Ada needed her to do. Ada tried to follow. Her left side had taken the impact of the wall, and something had gone wrong with the shoulder, a hot, sharp wrongness that limited the arm. She was moving. She could move, but slower than before. The smoke was thicker than before. She was covering the last 30 feet of aisle toward the door, and the visibility was close to nothing, and the fire was on 3 walls. Now she kept low. She kept moving. She came out of the barn door, and the cold night air hit her like a physical blow, clean and cold after the smoke, and she breathed it in, hard, too hard, and went to her knees in the dirt outside the door. Hands came around her arms. Gideon. He got her up and pulled her away from the building, far back, and she was coughing too hard to resist. He got her 20 yards out and went to his knees in the dirt with her, his hands on her face, checking her eyes in the firelight. "Where are you hurt?" he said. "Shoulder," she said between coughs. "Hit the wall. I don't think it's broken." "The mare?" "Both out." He exhaled hard. His hands were still on her face. "Zeke," she managed. "Where's here?" Zeke's voice came from behind them. He sounded wrong. She turned. Zeke was on the ground 10 feet away. Tomas was crouched over him. The burning timber that had come down in the aisle, she'd thought it missed. She'd thought it came down 3 feet ahead of her path. She'd been right about her own position. She'd been wrong about Zeke's. He'd come in after her. She hadn't known he was behind her. The timber had caught his shoulder and the right side of his head when it came down. He was conscious. She could see his eyes moving. But there was blood on the right side of his face, and he was holding his arm at an angle that told her the shoulder had taken serious impact. She was at his side before she'd made a conscious decision to move. Zeke. She got her hands on him, checking with the shoulder, protesting every movement of her left arm. "Look at me." Both eyes on me. His eyes focused on her, both eyes. "Working," he said. His voice was slower than usual, but steady. "Head's ringing, shoulders bad, I know." She ran her hand carefully along the shoulder, feeling through his shirt. "Can you move your fingers?" He moved them. "Good. Not broken," she said, "but you've taken a serious impact. You need to stay still. The horses are all out," Tomas said. "Everyone." Zeke closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Good," he said. Behind them, the barn roof gave way. A column of sparks shot up into the black Wyoming sky, brilliant and rising, and the walls followed in a cascade of flame and collapsing timber. The horses in the paddock were screaming again. At the sound of it, Davis and Hector were at the paddock fence, talking to them low, keeping them from throwing themselves against the rails. Ada kept her hands on Zeke. She was running through what she knew about head impacts, about the signs of serious internal injury, about what to watch for in the hours after blunt trauma to the skull. The bleeding was from a surface wound on the scalp. Scalp wounds bled dramatically and meant less than they looked. The real question was what was happening inside the skull. "Your vision," she said. "Is it clear? Both sides?" "Clear," he said. "Any numbness in your hands or feet?" "No." "Nausea?" "Some. That's normal after a head blow. I need you to tell me if it gets worse." She looked at Tomas. "Help me get him to the house. He needs to stay awake for the next hour, and I need to watch his pupils." They were moving Zeke toward the house when the sound of hooves came up the ranch road. 2 horses, fast. And then, out of the darkness at the road's edge, Creed rode into the firelight. Loretta was beside him, and behind them, at a slower pace, the county marshal on a gray horse and 2 deputies flanking him. Creed pulled up at the edge of the light. He looked at the burning barn, at the glowing ruin of it. The walls mostly collapsed now, the fire burning down toward embers. He looked at Ada on her knees beside Zeke. He looked at Gideon, standing in the yard, with soot on his face and blood on his hands from where he'd touched Ada's shoulder. Creed's expression was the expression of a man exactly where he expected to be. He reached into his coat. He rode forward and dropped a folded paper onto Gideon's chest. Not handed it, dropped it, so Gideon had to catch it or let it fall into the mud. Gideon caught it. "Eviction order," Creed said, "signed by Judge Porter this afternoon." He looked around the yard, at the burning barn, at Zeke on the ground, at Ada crouching beside him. 48 hours to vacate. The county marshal pulled up beside him. He had the look of a man deeply uncomfortable with the position he was in, but not uncomfortable enough to do anything about it. He didn't look at Gideon. He looked at the middle distance and said, with the hollow formality of a man reading something he'd been told to read, "Mr. Sterling, you've received notice. The property is under lien to Mr. Creed, pending resolution of the outstanding debt. You have 48 hours to remove your personal effects." Behind Ada, the last wall of the barn came down. Sparks went up like a second sky. Creed looked down at Ada from his horse. The firelight moved across his face. He looked at her hands dirty, one arm held slightly wrong from the shoulder impact, Zeke's blood on her sleeves, and he looked at Gideon beside her, and then he looked out at the property, and the expression on his face was already possessive. 48 hours, he said again, and then he and Loretta and the marshal and the deputies turned and rode back into the dark, back toward the road, the sound of the hooves moving away, until there was nothing but the settling of the fire and the sound of the horses in the paddock, and Zeke's careful breathing. Ada looked up at Gideon. He was standing above her with the eviction order in one hand, the paper bright against the dark, and he was looking down at her. She had stopped coughing. Her shoulder ached deeply. There was blood on her face, from somewhere she hadn't identified yet, a cut from the flying timber debris. She'd look at it later. The barn was gone. Zeke was injured. The horses were alive. Gideon went to his knees. He put one hand on her face. His palm was warm. His thumb moved across her cheekbone, checking the cut she hadn't looked at yet, and his eyes were moving over her with the clinical assessment that was his version of panic, the assessment he did instead of falling apart. She saw what was underneath it. Under the assessment, under the control, was the face of a man who had come back to find the barn on fire, and the woman he who had been. She saw it. He pressed his forehead to hers for 1 second, just one. Then he pulled back and was already looking at Zeke, already turning toward what needed doing. He put one hand flat on the ground, and in it was the eviction order, pressed into the mud, and he was performing CPR chest compressions, measured and hard and desperate on Ada's still form. Wait, she blinked. She was still here. She was looking at him. That moment, the forehead, the hands, was the moment she would carry later, but now he was doing the compressions. She'd stopped breathing. No. She was breathing. She was breathing. She was right here. She put her hand on his arm. Gideon, she said. I'm here. He stopped. He looked at her. She was right there. His face, she would remember this. She would carry this was the face of a man in the particular suspended moment between the worst thing and whatever came after. The eviction notice was in the mud. His enemies had just ridden away laughing in the dark. She was breathing. I'm all right, she said. I'm right here. He put his hand over hers. He held it. Then she looked at Zeke, and Gideon looked at Zeke, and they both looked at the embers of the barn, and then Ada said, get him inside. We have 48 hours, and I intend to use every minute of them. Sister Agatha arrived before dawn. Ada didn't know who'd sent for her. Tomas. Probably he'd ridden out sometime in the first hour after the fire and come back with the nun and her basket, and her 60 years of frontier medicine worn into the lines of her face like a second set of features. The church hall became a field station. That was how Ada thought of it afterward. The way her father's field stations had looked purposeful disorder. Every surface in use, the line between exhausted people and active work thin as paper. Zeke on the long table with the lamp brought close. Ada's instruments laid out beside Sister Agatha's herbs. Gideon standing where Ada put him and doing what she told him without argument, which she registered as a significant behavioral change from February. Zeke's head wound was a 4-inch laceration along the right temporal region, deep but clean-edged from the timber's impact. It needed sutures. She put in 7, working carefully in the lamplight. Sister Agatha, holding the wound closed and handing her the threaded needle, each time with the practiced timing of someone who'd assisted in field surgery before without ever calling it that. The shoulder was not broken. She'd been right about that from the initial assessment, but the musculature had been severely compressed, and the joint itself had taken enough force that she was concerned about structural damage to the tendons, the kind of damage that didn't always show itself immediately, that accumulated over days into something worse than the initial impact. You need to keep this arm still, she told Zeke, wrapping the shoulder in strips of clean cloth, completely still. For 2 weeks minimum. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. He looked at the ceiling. We don't have 2 weeks, I know, she said. Keep it still anyway. He closed his eyes. He was exhausted and in pain and running on the particular reserve that certain people had, the reserve that kicked in when there was nothing left except stubbornness. She'd seen it in her father's patience. She recognized it in Zeke, because she'd been drawing on her own version of it for the past 4 hours. Sister Agatha put a hand on Ada's arm. "Come here," she said. She steered Ada to the other end of the table and looked at her shoulder without asking permission, which Ada appreciated because she would have said she was fine, and they both knew she was lying. She peeled back Ada's coat and the blouse beneath it and pressed carefully along the shoulder joint, and Ada kept her face still through the assessment because making noise about it seemed counterproductive. "Not dislocated," Sister Agatha said. "I know. Deep bruising, possible bone bruise at the joint." She pressed again, more specifically, and Ada's breath went short. "Yes, bone bruise. Nothing you can do for that except—" "Keep it still and wait," Ada said. "I know." Sister Agatha looked at her. "You have a cut on your face," she said. "I'll clean it myself, Ada." She stopped. Sister Agatha said her name, the way very few people said it with the full weight of it. The two syllables given equal importance, the tone that said, "I am not making a suggestion." Ada had heard it from her father. She hadn't heard it from anyone since. She sat down and let the nun clean the cut on her cheek. It was not bad. A surface wound from the timber debris, already sealed by the time Sister Agatha got to it, needing nothing but cleaning and a strip of cloth to protect it. It would scar slightly. Ada was not particularly concerned about scars. She was concerned about her hands. She had been trying not to think about her hands for the last hour. She had been treating Zeke and managing the assessment and keeping herself focused on the work in front of her, the way her father had taught her, and she had been, systematically, not looking at her right hand. She looked now. The burn was on the palm and the inner surfaces of 3 fingers, the index, middle, and ring, from where she'd pushed the mare out of the stall. She remembered the moment. A burning piece of the collapsed joist had been on the stall door, and she'd pushed the door open anyway because there had been no other option. She remembered the heat of it and the sound. She didn't remember deciding to do it. Second-degree burns. She'd known before she looked. She'd treated enough of them to recognize the sensation, deep, specific, a burning that went below the skin into something that felt like the architecture of the hand itself. The skin across her palm was red and beginning to blister, and the fingers were already showing the early signs of what she knew would come. As the burns healed over the following weeks, the skin would contract. Scar tissue had no elasticity. It pulled tight across the underlying structures as it formed. And if you didn't fight it, if you didn't push against it deliberately and painfully every single day, the fingers would curl toward the palm and stay there. Burn contracture. She had read about it. She had treated it in others, had told patients to move, to stretch, to do the daily exercises that felt like tearing the healing apart. She had said to a miner, "Last summer, I know it hurts. Do it anyway. The scar tissue will win if you let it rest." She had said that. She looked at her hand and thought about what it meant for a surgeon if the scar tissue won. Sister Agatha was looking at the hand, too. "I need to clean it," Ada said. Her voice was steady. "Yes," Sister Agatha said, "and bandage it properly. And I need to start movement exercises in about 10 days, when the initial healing has closed." "Ada," Sister Agatha said again, the same tone. "I know what it means," Ada said. A pause. "I know," she said again, quieter. Sister Agatha cleaned the burn. She had her own preparation for burns, a compound of aloe vera, and something else she didn't specify. But that smelled faintly of pine resin, and it went on cool and reduced the immediate pain significantly. She bandaged the hand with clean strips of cloth, careful, the bandaging done in a way that held the fingers as open and extended as possible rather than curling them in. "You've seen burn contracture before," Ada said. "Many times," Sister Agatha said. "The indigenous healers have better methods for managing the contraction than anything in your Gray's Anatomy. I'll bring what I know. I'd be grateful." "You won't be grateful when we're doing the exercises," Sister Agatha said, and her voice held the faintest dryness, which was her version of humor. "You'll feel differently then." Ada looked at her wrapped hand. She turned it over carefully, feeling the bulk of the bandaging, the slight pull of the burned skin underneath. Across the room, Gideon was helping Tomas settle Zeke onto the cot in the side room. She could hear them, Zeke's brief, pain directions, Tomas's steady responses, Gideon saying very little because he'd learned by now that Zeke didn't want comfort, he wanted competence. She watched Gideon. He'd been operating since they'd come out of the barn, with the focused efficiency of a man who knew that the moment he stopped moving, everything he was containing would catch up with him. She recognized it. She'd been doing the same thing. The work was useful that way. It held everything else at bay until there was space to deal with it. He came out of the side room and crossed to her and looked at her hand. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "How bad?" he said. "Second degree. Significant surface area on the palm and 3 fingers." She kept her voice clinical. "There'll be scarring. The concern is contracture. As the scar tissue forms, it pulls the fingers closed. I need to do daily stretching exercises starting in about 10 days to prevent permanent restriction." He was quiet. "Permanent restriction," he said. "It can be prevented. With the exercises." She held his gaze. "It's going to hurt." "The exercises. But I've told enough patients to do painful things that I have very little right to refuse to do them myself." He looked at her for another moment. Then he went to the basin and washed his face and his hands and came back and sat down across from her at the table where Sister Agatha had left her supplies. And he looked at Ada with the gray eyes that didn't hide things as well as they used to. "Tell me what happened to you in that barn," he said. "All of it," she told him. Step by step, what she'd done and in what order. He listened without interrupting. She told him about the mare in the corner, and the voice she'd kept going, and the moment the joist came down, and the impact against the wall. And he listened to all of it, with his hands flat on the table, and his face doing something she'd learned to read over the past 8 months as the controlled exterior of feelings that ran deep and had nowhere yet to go. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. "Then you went back in for the second mare." "Yes," after the smoke was already heavy. "They both needed to get out." "Ada, they both needed to get out," she said again. "Level. There was no version where I left one of them." He looked at the table. "No," he said. "I suppose there wasn't." He said it like a man accepting something about another person that terrified him and also made complete sense. "The mares are all right," she said. "Both of them. The foals are going to be all right." He nodded. "The barn is gone," he said. "Yes, and we have 48 hours. About 44 now." He was quiet. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was beginning at the edges of the sky, barely there. More the absence of complete darkness than any actual light, but present. He stood up. "I'm going to ride," he said. She looked at him. "Where?" "The people you wrote to. The ones Zeke couldn't reach last night." He was already moving to the door for his coat. "If you wrote the letters for a reason, then I'm going to make sure they were received." "Gideon sleep," he said. "I mean it. 3 hours at least. You're not going to be able to do the work that's coming if you don't." She opened her mouth. 3 hours, he said. "I'll be back." He went. She did sleep. Not because she had agreed to exactly, but because the moment she put her head down on her folded arm at the table, the exhaustion took her under completely. The way true exhaustion did no transition, just darkness. She woke to voices. Not the voices of the people she'd fallen asleep with. Different voices, more of them, coming from outside. She raised her head and looked at the light in the window and calculated that she'd slept close to 4 hours, which was more than she'd intended and less than her body wanted. Stood and went to the door. The yard of the Broken Spur was full of people. Not a crowd, exactly. Not like a town meeting or a market day. But there were people who hadn't been there last night, a family from one of the eastern farms, their wagon in the road. 2 miners she recognized from the camp north of the ridge. The Shoshone nephew, the serious young man she'd taught wound care to, standing near the paddock fence with 3 other men from the encampment. Sister Agatha's mission school helper. A young Mexican woman named Rosa, sitting on the step with a basket, and more coming up the road. She could see the shapes of them. Gideon was in the center of the yard. He wasn't talking, he was listening, which was more characteristic. Zeke had come out of the side room at some point, despite Ada's instructions, and was leaning against the doorframe with his arm in the sling she'd made him, and his face still showing the effects of the night. He looked at Ada when she appeared in the doorway and gave her a small, deliberate nod. She looked at him. She looked at the yard full of people. She looked at Gideon, who finally noticed her, standing there and came toward her. Some of them came before I reached them, he said quietly. They saw the smoke last night, came to see what happened. She looked at the Eastern Farm family. The father had burns on his hands from last summer that she'd treated for 6 weeks. The mother had brought her sick youngest child to the Thursday clinic 3 times. She looked at the miners. One of them had come to her with a broken arm in August. She'd reset it in the church hall while he'd stared at the ceiling and refused to make a sound. And afterward he'd told her his mother had been a midwife back in County Cork and that he recognized the work of someone who'd been properly taught. She looked at Rosa, and Rosa lifted the basket. And Ada could see it held food bread and dried meat, and something wrapped in cloth that smelled like corn and spice. Her throat tightened. She had not cried once since the fire started. She was not going to cry now, in the middle of the yard, in front of all these people. She pressed her lips together and breathed through it. Gideon was watching her. "Your letters," he said, "the ones you wrote." Some of them wrote back. He reached into his coat and produced 3 folded papers. "I picked these up from Sister Agatha's. On the way. She was already receiving them this morning." She took them with her good hand and read them. Brief notes, all 3. The kind of notes people wrote when they meant something and didn't have fancy language for it. One from the miner with the Irish mother, heard what Creed done. "Am coming Saturday, bringing what I can." One from a Shoshone family she'd treated over the spring. "You helped ours. We come help yours." One from the elderly rancher east of town whose persistent cough she'd treated. "My wife says to come. We are coming." She folded them carefully with her good hand. "We still don't have enough," she said. Her voice was steady. "Even with what people bring, we're 388 short of the note payment. More with the penalty fees. Creed will add." "I know," Gideon said. "So what are we—" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know more people are coming, and I know you built something here that I couldn't have built, and I know that has to count for something." He paused. "You sowed something, Ada, in this ground. I've been watching it since February, and I didn't have words for it until last night." He stopped. "Zeke does." She looked across the yard at Zeke. Zeke looked back at her. He pushed off the doorframe and crossed the yard slowly, favoring his good arm, and stopped in front of her. "You think you're fighting alone, Gid," he said. He was looking at Gideon, but the words had a broader address. She sowed seeds of kindness in this hard dirt, and now the dirt is paying it back. The yard was quiet for a moment. Then the farm family's wagon shifted as the father climbed down, and the sound of people moving broke the stillness, and everyone started doing the various things they'd come to do. The next 36 hours moved the way crisis hours always moved, simultaneously, too slow and too fast, the time expanding in some moments and collapsing in others. Ada managed Zeke's recovery, checked her own hand every 6 hours, directed the gathering of people who kept arriving through the day. They brought what they had, not what they didn't have. That was the thing she kept noticing. Nobody was offering what would hurt them to give. They were offering the genuine surplus of lives that didn't have much surplus, a pouch of coin from the mining camp, pooled from a dozen men who'd each put in what they could spare. Produce from the eastern farms. Carved wooden tools from the Shoshone encampment, beautiful things, worth real money to the right buyer in Dunmore. A bolt of good cloth from Rosa's family that could be sold to the dry goods store. Sister Agatha organized it. She had a gift for organization that Ada recognized as the result of 2 decades managing a mission on almost no resources, the talent for seeing what things were actually worth and what they could be converted into, and in what order. By the afternoon of the second day, they had assembled what they had. Ada sat with Gideon at the table, and they counted it. Coin, paper notes, the estimated value of goods that could be converted quickly. Sister Agatha sat across from them and checked their math, $1,341, against an outstanding note of $1,400, plus Creed's likely penalty fees. Still short. She set her pencil down. She was looking at the numbers and thinking, and then she looked up and found Gideon looking at her bandaged hand specifically. "The exercises," he said. "You said they start in 10 days. About that when the initial wound is closed enough. Show me what they are. She looked at him. Now, she said. Not now, when the time comes. He met her eyes. Show me what to do, and I'll help you do them. Every day. She looked at him for a moment. They're painful, she said. I know. You'll have to push against the scar tissue. When I tell you to stop, you keep going within reason. The instinct is to stop when I say stop because I'll mean it. But the scar tissue wins if you listen to me every time I say stop. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. She looked at him, at the man who had met her half-frozen in a blizzard in February and carried her trunk with one hand and set her money on the mantelpiece and poured whiskey. He didn't let himself have any more and learned to be honest in stages the way everyone had to learn it, in stages, when they were ready. All right, she said. They were still 4 days from the point where the exercises could start when the morning of the deadline arrived, the 1st of October. They were at the county courthouse at 9 o'clock. Ada and Gideon and Zeke, who had not stayed in the cot as directed, but was upright and present with his arm in the sling and his face showing nothing of what the night walk had cost him. Tomas had stayed at the ranch with Davis and Hector and the horses. Sister Agatha was already there. So were 8 of the people who had come to the ranch, the miners, the farm family, Rosa. They stood at the back of the small courtroom without anyone having organized them to do so. Creed was there. Loretta was beside him, in a different velvet dress, dark green this time, this one as impractical as the last, the same armor made in different color. She looked at Ada when they came in, and her face was carefully composed into something meant to resemble sympathy. It wasn't. Creed's attorney was a man named Hatch, who had come from Denver and who radiated the particular expensive confidence of legal counsel that had never worked for anyone who wasn't already wealthy. Judge Porter sat at the front. He had the look of a man who wanted this resolved quickly so he could get to his lunch. Hatch presented the note. He presented the outstanding balance. He presented the 48-hour notice and the signed eviction order. Everything was in order. Everything was correctly executed. The document trail was clean because Creed had had months to construct it cleanly. Porter looked at Gideon. Do you have the outstanding balance? He said, the tone of a man who expected the answer to be no. Gideon looked at Ada. Ada put the envelope on the desk in front of the judge. The outstanding balance, she said, plus the penalty fees specified in the note. She kept her voice even. Her bandaged hand was in her coat pocket. Her good hand was steady, counted and confirmed by Sister Agatha of the Dunmore Mission, who is present if the court wants a witness to the counting. Porter looked at the envelope. He opened it. He counted. The room was very quiet while he counted. Creed's expression had shifted not to panic, nothing so visible as that, but a tightening, a calculation starting behind his eyes. Porter set the money down. That is, he counted again. That appears to be the full balance plus fees. $1,412, Ada said. We have a written accounting if the court requires it. Hatch was already talking to Creed in a low voice at the side of the room. Creed's jaw was set. He was not a man who showed loss easily, which meant the absence of his usual confident expression was its own kind of tell. But then Zeke stepped forward. He reached into his coat with his good arm, and he placed something on the judge's desk beside the money. A silver pocket watch. Small, the case engraved with a pattern of oak leaves. Old, from the look of it, the silver worn at the edges with long handling. And beside it, a folded receipt from the Dunmore pawn shop dated 4 days ago. That watch, Zeke said, belonged to Gideon Sterling's father. It was on the mantelpiece of the Broken Spur house on the night of September 28th. He looked at Porter. It was not there on the morning of September 29th. The pawn shop receipt shows it was brought in for sale on the morning of September 29th by a man matching the description of one of Creed's hired hands, a man named Doyle, who 3 people at the pawn shop can identify by name because he's a known figure in Dunmore. The room was very quiet. That watch connects Creed's man to the Broken Spur on the night of the fire, Zeke said, which means it connects him to the arson. Porter looked at the watch. He looked at the receipt. He looked at Creed. Creed said. That the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a federal marshal's coat came through it. Ada had not known about this part. She found out later that Zeke had sent a letter 3 weeks ago, before the fire, When he'd first started tracking the movements of Creed's operation, a letter to the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne outlining the pattern of activity he'd observed. The arson had been the final piece. The watch receipt had been the specific, documentable connection the marshal's office needed to act. The federal marshal walked to the front of the room. He looked at Creed. "Mr. Creed," he said, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of arson and conspiracy to defraud to be transferred to federal jurisdiction." He paused. "I'd ask you to come quietly." Creed did not come quietly, in the sense that he said several things loudly, and his attorney said several more things even more loudly, and none of it changed anything, because the warrant was real, and the jurisdiction was federal, and Porter's connections to Creed, whatever they were, did not extend to obstructing a federal arrest. They took him out. Loretta stood in the courtroom after he was gone. She was standing very still in the green velvet dress, and her face had done something that stripped away the composed surface of it and showed something underneath. Not grief exactly, but the particular expression of a person calculating a new position from scratch, quickly, because the old one had just collapsed. She looked at Gideon. He looked back at her. His face was unreadable in the way it had been in February, the old lid back in place. But Ada could see from beside him that his jaw was relaxed, not braced. He was looking at Loretta the way you looked at something that used to mean a great deal, and now was simply a fact about your past. Loretta looked at Ada. Ada met her gaze. There was a long moment between them, the kind of moment that didn't require words, because everything that could be said in it was visible on both their faces, if you knew how to read them. Loretta looked away first. She gathered her skirts and walked out of the courtroom without speaking to anyone, her back straight, the velvet dress moving around her, and she went out into the October morning, and the door closed behind her. The courtroom exhaled. Gideon picked up the pocket watch from the judge's desk. He looked at it for a moment, at the oak leaf engraving, worn thin at the edges, and then he closed his fist around it. He looked at Zeke. "You tracked the watch," he said. "Took me 2 weeks," Zeke said. "After the fire, I had a face to match it to. Doyle wasn't hard to find. He's not a careful man." Gideon looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. The way he said it made it clear that he was thanking him for more than the watch. "That's what partners do," Zeke said, deliberately, looking at both of them. They walked out of the courthouse into the first pale sunlight of October. It was cold and clear, the air the particular sharp clarity of early autumn in Wyoming, the mountains visible to the west. For the first time in a week, the snow already on the high peaks glinting white. Ada stood on the courthouse steps. Her hand ached under the bandaging. Her shoulder was better. 4 days of keeping it still had helped, and Sister Agatha's compound had brought the swelling down significantly. The cut on her cheek was healing clean. Gideon came to stand beside her. He looked at her bandaged hand. He reached out and carefully, without hurting the shoulder, took her good hand in his. She looked at their hands together, his scarred and weathered, hers with the bandaging visible at the wrist. 10 days, he said, for the exercises. About that, she said. Then we start. She looked up at him. It's going to be painful, she said. I mean that genuinely. For both of us, you're going to have to push against what I'm asking you to stop, and that's not easy to do when someone is hurting. No, he said. It isn't. He was quiet for a moment. The mountain light moved across his face. But I've been doing the wrong thing with pain for a long time, he said. Letting it make me smaller. Letting it make me quiet when I should have been moving. He looked at her. I'd rather do the hard thing now with you. She held his gaze. Then we'll do the hard thing, she said. He nodded. His hand stayed around hers, careful of the bandaging, careful of the shoulder, present in the way he was learning to be present, not performing it, not making a production of it, just there. Solid, real. Behind them, through the courthouse door, they could hear the voices of their people, Zeke and Sister Agatha, and the miners and the farm family, and Rosa, the sounds of people beginning to move toward what came next. The ranch was still standing. The note was paid. Creed was in federal custody. And Ada Vance Sterling stood on the courthouse steps in the October light with her burned hand and her healing shoulder and the long work of recovery ahead of her. and she looked at the mountains she had not been able to see the day she arrived, half dead in a blizzard, and she thought about seeds, the ones you planted, the ones you didn't know were taking root, the ones that grew in hard ground, because hard ground, if you worked it long enough, eventually gave way. She was going to get the full use of her hand back. She was going to do the exercises every day, and it was going to hurt, and she was going to do it anyway, because that was what her father had taught her, and what her mother had taught her, and what 8 months in Wyoming had confirmed. You moved through the hard thing. You kept moving. You picked up the instruments, and you went back to work, because there were still people who needed you, and you were still here. The morning after the courthouse, the ranch felt different, not better. Exactly. The barn was still a black ruin. The smell of charred wood hung over the yard like weather. Zeke's arm was in a sling, and Ada's hand throbbed under its bandaging with every heartbeat. And the note was paid, but everything else that Creed had broken was still broken. But people kept coming. That was the thing Ada hadn't anticipated. She had written those letters expecting, at best, a handful of responses. What she got instead was something she didn't have a clean word for. The Eastern farm family had stayed overnight, sleeping in their wagon, rather than make the road home in the dark. Rosa came back in the morning with more food and her younger brother, who turned out to be skilled with timber, and offered 2 days of work toward rebuilding. The Shoshone nephew, his name was Edmund. She'd finally learned it, properly arrived with 4 men from the encampment and a mule loaded with cut pine logs. She stood in the yard watching all of this and thought about her father. He used to say that medicine was a form of trust. You put your hands on a person at their most vulnerable, and they let you, and that act of letting was not small. It required belief that you meant well, and belief, once given and honored, accumulated. It didn't stay between 2 people. It moved outward, the way water moved, looking for the lowest ground. Edmund, she called across the yard. He looked up from where he was talking with Gideon about the timber. Thank you for coming, she said, and tell me your uncle is still improving. He's walking outside again, Edmund said. 20 minutes yesterday. Good. The movement is what matters. She paused. And the positioning at night, is he keeping his head slightly elevated? 2 blankets folded under. Like you said. She nodded. He nodded back. It was the whole conversation, and it said everything. Gideon came to stand beside her as Edmund went back to the timber discussion. He sent word last week to 3 other encampments, Gideon said quietly, about what you did, what you're doing. He watched Edmund for a moment. I didn't know that until this morning. Neither did I, Ada said. The rebuilding started that day. Not the barn itself that was weeks of work, but the frame of it, the bones of it, which was where you had to start. Edmund's men knew timber work, and Rose's brother knew joinery, and 2 of the miners turned out to have built structures before they came west, and by afternoon the yard was loud with hammering, and the smell of fresh-cut pine was cutting through the char. Ada worked beside them when she could. One-handed work only. The bandaged right hand kept out of harm's way, which was maddening. She mixed the chinking compound. She held things in place while others fastened them. She brought water and made coffee and kept moving, because stopping meant thinking about the hand, and thinking about the hand meant thinking about what happened if the contracture won. She didn't let herself think about that in front of people. She thought about it alone, at night, lying in the dark, listening to Gideon's breathing from the other side of the curtain. On the 3rd morning after the courthouse, Sister Agatha arrived with a box. It was not a small box. She set it on the table and opened it, and inside were glass jars and cloth bundles, and several things Ada didn't recognize, alongside several things she did. Indigenous burn treatment, Sister Agatha said. She held up a jar of something pale and dense, the consistency of cold lard, made from specific plants I won't list here, because you'll spend a week trying to identify them when you should be letting me apply them. She set the jar down. We start today. The initial closure isn't. I know what the initial closure looks like, Sister Agatha said. I've seen more burn wounds than either of us would prefer. The compound works at the surface level. It doesn't compromise the closure. She looked at Ada. Sit down. Ada sat down. The treatment was careful and deliberate, and not as painful as Ada had prepared herself for. which made her trust it less until Sister Agatha explained the mechanism the compound worked by maintaining flexibility in the skin as it healed, reducing the rate of contraction at the cellular level rather than fighting the contraction after it had formed. Her prevention rather than treatment. Her father had always said that prevention was the better medicine, the medicine that required more knowledge and less drama. Where did you learn this? Ada asked. From a woman named Margaret Barefoot. 20 years ago, Sister Agatha said. She spent 3 days teaching me in exchange for teaching her to read. She smoothed the compound over Ada's palm with extraordinary gentleness. Knowledge travels both directions if you let it. Ada watched her work. I've been thinking about that, Ada said. About teaching, not just individuals. Something more organized. A school, Sister Agatha said. She didn't make it a question. Not a formal one, not yet, but a regular gathering every other week, maybe. Women from the farms, anyone who wants to come. Basic wound care, fever management, childbirth complications. The things that kill people out here because there's nobody close enough to help, and people don't know what to do while they're waiting for help. Sister Agatha rewrapped the hand carefully, finger by finger, keeping the position open. The church hall is available, she said, as it always has been. I'd need your help. You'd have it. Sister Agatha tied off the bandaging, as you always have. Gideon had been hearing all of this from where he sat at the table with the accounts, and he didn't look up from them. But Ada saw his pencil, slow, and knew he was listening. The income from the practice, he said, without lifting his head. We could allocate a portion towards supplies for the teaching sessions. Not much, but something. Ada looked at him. That's a ranch expense, she said. No, he said. He did look up then. It's a community investment. Same thing Creed understood in reverse. He invested in controlling people. We invest in something different. She looked at him for a long moment. You're going to make a very unconventional rancher, she said. I've been told I'm unconventional generally, he said, and went back to the accounts. Mr. Agatha made a sound that might have been a laugh. Very small, very controlled. 4 days after the courthouse, the Federal Marshal's office sent a rider with paperwork confirming that Creed had been transferred to Cheyenne for a federal hearing. The charges were arson and conspiracy to defraud, and the rider mentioned, almost as an aside, that additional charges were being considered related to Creed's operation at the bank. Corruption at the county level had a way of unraveling once federal jurisdiction got involved, and Creed's network of purchased loyalties was not holding together well under scrutiny. Zeke read the paperwork twice with his good arm, folded it, and handed it back to Gideon without a word. But his face did something, a small, settled thing. The look of a man watching a long account finally began to balance. Porter? Ada asked. Judge Porter resigned from the bench this morning, the writer said. He'd been watching them with open curiosity, word from the county clerk. Nobody in the yard celebrated. That wasn't the temperament of any of them. But there was a quality to the silence that followed that was different from ordinary silence. Something released in it. The following Saturday, Ada held the first community medical session in the church hall. She had not announced it formally. She had mentioned it to Sister Agatha, and Sister Agatha had mentioned it at the mission, and Rosa had mentioned it at the dry goods store, and Edmund had sent word to the encampment. That was enough. 11 women came. 3 brought children. 2 brought their husbands, who stood in the back of the room with their arms folded, and the expressions of men who had been told to come and had decided they might as well learn something. Ada stood at the front of the room with her bandaged hand in her coat pocket and her good hand available, and she started where her father had always started. The most important thing in an emergency, she said, is not to panic. Panic is the enemy of useful action. You don't have to feel calm. You probably won't feel calm. But you act as if you are, because the person who needs your help is watching your face and reading it like a text. And if they read panic, they panic too. And a panicking patient is harder to treat. She looked around the room. So the first skill I'm going to teach you is not medical. It is simply this. Breathe first. Look at what you have in front of you. Then act. The room was very quiet. All right, Ada said. Let's begin. Edmund was in the back row. He had his notebook open, the same battered notebook she'd seen him with twice before, and he was writing. She made a note to herself to talk to him after, about what he wanted to learn, about how far he wanted to go with it. Knowledge traveled both directions if you let it. She intended to let it. The morning of the final deadline, Ada was up before the sun. She dressed in the dark, one-handed and efficient, and went out to stand on the step of the cabin. The October cold was sharp and clean, and the stars were still visible in the western sky, very bright in the way they were right before the light came. The mountains to the west were black shapes against a slightly less black sky. She had been thinking all night about her hand, not with fear, exactly, with something more like the clear-eyed assessment she applied to any medical situation. The burns were healing. Sister Agatha's compound had made a measurable difference in the rate of contraction. She could see it in the daily checks, in the slowly improving flexibility when she attempted the opening exercises. It was not healed. It would not be healed for months. The full arc of recovery was long and uncertain, and would require exactly the kind of daily, painful, determined work that she had prescribed to others without fully knowing, until now, what she was asking. She knew now. She heard Gideon behind her. He moved quietly for a large man, but she'd learned his particular quiet, the specific weight of his step, the sound his coat made. He came out and stood beside her on the step, and they both looked at the dark mountains. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. He had the pocket watch in his hand, his father's watch, which Zeke had recovered from the pawn shop, and which had sat on the table between them these past days like a small, quiet anchor. He turned it over, once between his fingers, and then put it in his coat pocket. "Zeke's already at the barn," he said. "His shoulder? Better. He won't admit how much better, but I watched him lift a timber yesterday with that arm, and he didn't favor it." Ada stored this information. She would check it herself later. Zeke was, in her medical experience, the worst kind of patient, too stoic to complain until something had gone genuinely wrong, and too proud to admit improvement until he was certain he hadn't spoken too soon. They rode into Dunmore as the sun came fully up. All of them, Gideon and Ada and Zeke, and Tomas riding alongside with the easy movement of a man whose femur had healed straight and true, and Sister Agatha in the mission wagon, and Edmund on the horse he'd ridden out from the encampment. Rosa was already in town. She'd gone in the evening before and spent the night at her family's place, and was standing on the courthouse steps when they arrived, hands folded, absolutely composed. The courtroom was already occupied when they walked in. Creed was not there. He was in Cheyenne, but his attorney Hatch was present, and beside Hatch was a man Ada didn't recognize a second attorney, the kind that appeared when the first one started to get nervous. And sitting in the gallery with the particular rigid posture of a woman maintaining composure through effort alone was Loretta. She was not in velvet today. She was in a dark wool traveling dress, practical and expensive, but its practicality told a story. Loretta was a woman who read situations and dressed accordingly, and she had dressed today for a courthouse, not a performance. She had dressed for something uncertain. Ada noticed this and filed it without comment. Judge Porter's seat was empty. The man who sat behind the desk instead was someone Ada had not seen before younger, with a precise bearing that said federal appointment rather than county patronage. He had come from Cheyenne with the federal marshal's office. She would learn later. His name was Judge Calloway, and he had the reputation of a man who had not eaten dinner at anyone's house in exchange for anything. Hatch presented the note again, the balance, the penalty fees. He presented the eviction order. His voice had the same expensive confidence as before, but there was something slightly less certain in the cadence of it. Calloway looked at Gideon. "Outstanding balance, Mr. Sterling?" Gideon looked at Ada. Ada put the envelope on the desk. "The outstanding balance," she said, "plus the penalty fees specified in the note." Her voice was level. The bandaged hand was in her coat pocket. The good hand was steady at her side, counted and confirmed by Sister Agatha of the Dunmore mission, who is present if the court requires a witness to the counting. Calloway opened the envelope. He counted. The room held its breath, all of it, every person in it. The attorneys and Loretta, and the people gathered in the gallery who had ridden in from farms and mining camps and the encampment to be present for this. It was the counting that mattered. The slow, deliberate sound of currency being organized and verified. $1,412, Calloway said. He said it twice, once to hear it, once to confirm it. That appears to be the full balance, including penalty fees. Hatch began speaking quickly. Something about additional claims. Something about interest compounded differently than the original note specified. Calloway listened to approximately 15 seconds of this and then raised one hand. The note terms are the note terms, he said. Payment in full, as presented, satisfies the obligation. Then Zeke stepped forward. He moved with the careful deliberateness of a man whose shoulder was improving, but not yet healed, and he placed the pocket watch on Calloway's desk. Small, silver, the oak leaf engraving worn thin from years of handling, and beside it, the folded pawnshop receipt. He explained it the same way he had explained it to Ada, concisely and precisely, in the manner of a man who had served in the army and learned that a report was most effective when it contained only what mattered. The watch, Doyle's face, the pawnshop, the receipt dated the morning after the fire. 3 witnesses at the pawnshop who could name Doyle by name because he was a known figure in Dunmore and not a careful man. Calloway looked at the watch. He looked at the receipt. He looked at Hatch, whose expensive confidence had become something else entirely. Then the courtroom door opened. The federal marshal walked in. He did not hurry. He walked to the front of the room with the unhurried purpose of a man who had done this before and understood that speed and authority were not the same thing. He looked at the bench. He nodded at Calloway. Then he turned and looked at Hatch. "Mr. Hatch," he said, "I have a warrant for the arrest of Bartholomew Creed on charges of arson and conspiracy to defraud. Your client is currently in federal custody in Cheyenne." He paused. "I also have documentation relevant to the activities of Mr. Creed's business operation in this county that the federal court will be examining over the coming months." He looked around the room. "I would advise anyone who has been doing business with Mr. Creed to secure independent legal counsel." He said it to the room. But he looked briefly at Hatch. Hatch began gathering his papers. Creed's sneers at Ada in the outline, and she had been prepared for it, had rehearsed the response in her head, through the long night, the clean, cold steel of it. But Creed was not here. He was in Cheyenne, and he would not be coming back to this courtroom. And the speech she had prepared was not for Hatch or for Calloway or for the federal marshal. It was for Loretta. Ada turned. Loretta was still sitting in the gallery. She hadn't moved during any of this. She had sat with her back straight and her hands folded and her face arranged into the composed expression that Ada recognized now as Loretta's version of armor, the same armor the velvet had been. Different material, same purpose. Their eyes met. Ada walked to where Loretta sat. She stood in front of her for a moment, looking at her. The dark wool dress, the careful hair, the hands in her lap, which were, Ada noticed, for the first time, not entirely steady. "A bill of sale ends when the money is paid," Ada said. Her voice was quiet, not cruel, precise, but a partnership built on mutual respect cannot be bought at any price. She held Loretta's gaze. "My hand may carry scars, but it has saved dozens of lives. That is what it has done with its time." She paused. "I can't speak to what yours have done." Loretta looked at her. Something moved through her face. Ada expected contempt or anger, or the sharp social deflection Loretta was skilled at. What she saw instead was something older. Quieter, buried under 3 years of choices. Loretta didn't say anything. She looked away first. She looked at her own hands in her lap. Ada turned and walked back to Gideon. He handed her the pocket watch. She looked at it for a moment, the oak leaf engraving, the worn edges, and then she handed it back to him. He closed his fist around it, and she saw, watching his face, the particular expression of a man setting something down that he had been carrying in the wrong place for a long time. Not down into the ground, not away into a locked room, just down, where it belonged, where it could be held rightly. They walked out of the courthouse into October sunlight. The people who had come with them were on the steps. Rosa and Edmund and Sister Agatha and Tomas and the miners and the farm family and 8 or 10 others who had ridden in that morning. They made no celebration noise. This was not the temperament of any person present. But the quality of the air on those steps, the clean, cold, specific air of the first real autumn day, was its own statement. Gideon took Ada's good hand in his. He was careful about the shoulder. He had learned the precise geometry of which movements aggravated it and which didn't, the way he'd been learning all of her, carefully and without hurry. "Zeke," he said, looking back at where Zeke was coming down the courthouse steps. Zeke stopped. "What you did," Gideon said. "The watch. The weeks of tracking it." He paused. The pause was not uncertainty. It was the weight of the thing being said. "Thank you." Zeke looked at him. "That's what partners do," he said, deliberately, looking at both of them, making it an address to both, because they were both present and both meant and both had earned it. Nobody said anything else for a moment. The mountains caught the morning light, the high peaks white with early snow, the sky the particular bright blue that came with cold and clarity. Ada looked at all of it. The ranch was standing. The note was paid. Creed was in federal custody. And the corrupt machinery he'd built in this county was beginning to come apart at its purchased seams. And there was a long winter coming. And after it a spring, and the barn was half rebuilt, and her hand was healing, and the exercises started in 6 more days. Gideon's thumb moved across the back of her hand. Not a dramatic gesture, just present, just there. She looked up at him. "We should get back," she said. "Edmund's crew wants to finish the east wall before the light goes." "We should get back," he agreed. They rode home with the sun at their backs, and the road ahead clear and open. And for the first time since February, since the blizzard and the frozen ground, and the horse coming out of the white, Ada felt something she hadn't let herself feel fully until now. Safe. Not because danger was gone. Danger was never entirely gone, but safe in the sense of grounded, rooted, standing on ground that was hers to stand on, in a life she had built deliberately, with her own hands, bad and good alike. That was enough. That was everything. The following May, the cottonwoods came back. Every year they did this, the branches bare all winter, gray and skeletal against the snow. And then one morning in early May, you looked out the cabin window and they were simply green. Not gradually, just there. All at once, the way the best things arrived, when you'd been patient enough to wait for them. Ada stood at the window with her coffee and looked at the cottonwoods. Her right hand was wrapped around the mug. Both hands. That was the thing. She still paused over some mornings, the simple fact of both hands working together, the right one doing what hands did, holding a mug without thought, because thought was no longer required. The exercises had taken 4 months. She would not say they were behind her, exactly. She still did them every morning, a shortened version of the routine, because the therapist's instinct told her that maintenance was different from healing, and both were necessary. But the period of fighting for it, the daily half hour, with Gideon sitting across from her, his hands on hers, pressing through the resistance, while she breathed and did not tell him to stop, that was done. She hadn't told him to stop. Not once. He had pushed through every single time she wanted him to, reading the difference between enough and too far, with the same precision he applied to everything he took seriously. It had taken him 2 weeks to learn that calibration. After that, it had been steady progress, the scar tissue losing its argument degree by degree, the fingers opening further each week, the grip strengthening until the day she picked up a scalpel, her father's scalpel, the handle worn smooth from decades of use, and held it correctly for the first time in 4 months, and didn't put it down for a long time afterward. Gideon had been across the room when that happened. He had seen her face. He hadn't said anything. He had just gone back to what he was doing, which was the correct thing to do. And she had loved him for understanding that it was a private moment, even when it wasn't private. There was a knock at the door. She called it open, and Rosa came in, stomping the May mud off her boots with the familiarity of someone who had stopped asking whether she was welcome. 11 today, Rosa said. She meant the morning session at the church hall. "I saw the wagon list yesterday," Ada said. "The Hendersons are bringing their daughter-in-law. First baby, coming in July." Rosa poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, with the ease of someone at home in someone else's kitchen. She had become, in the past months, something that Ada had not expected and deeply valued: a colleague, in the real sense, not honorary. Rosa had attended every session since October. She had a gift for obstetrics specifically that Ada had recognized early and started cultivating deliberately, the way her father had cultivated her. First babies in July make everyone nervous. July is enough time, Ada said. We'll be well prepared. Rosa looked at Ada's hand around the mug. She did this sometimes not staring, just checking, the careful peripheral attention of someone who had watched the recovery and still tracked it without meaning to. Good, Rosa said simply. The whole medical assessment contained in one word. Ada smiled. Tomas appeared in the barn doorway as Ada crossed the yard. He was carrying a saddle that he had no business carrying one-handed, which meant his leg had strengthened past what he admitted to, which she had suspected for 2 months. Tomas, she said. He stopped. Both hands on that saddle, she said. The leg's fine? The leg's been fine for 3 months. I'm talking about form. She gave him a look that she had inherited directly from her father. Good form now means no problems later. Both hands. He adjusted his grip without further argument. The leg, she noted, showed no compensation in his gait at all. Fully recovered. Clean. She felt the particular satisfaction that came from watching a procedure succeed across its complete timeline, not just the surgery, but everything after. The long arc of it. The part that required patience. The new barn was finished. It had been finished since February, built with pine from Edmund's crew, and joinery from Rosa's brother, and labor from a dozen people who had come back to help the way people came back to places where they felt their contribution mattered. It smelled the way new buildings smelled fresh-cut wood and sawdust, and the particular cleanness of something that hadn't yet been weathered. The horses had taken to it immediately. Ira, in particular, seemed to find the slightly wider stalls agreeable. He'd been standing in the center of his new stall, with his ears forward. The first morning, the posture of a horse taking stock of improved circumstances. The mare's foals from last spring were yearlings now, leggy and curious and bold, running the fence line in the mornings because they couldn't think of anything better to do with their energy. A second round of foals was due in June. The gray colt they'd sold to Peterson had won a regional race in April, which had come back to them as word rather than money, but was its own form of value. The Broken Spurs breeding program had a reputation now that was growing faster than Gideon had expected, and faster than he let himself acknowledge. Because acknowledging good things before they were certain felt to him like tempting fate. Ada had been working on that with him, not with arguments, just with the steady practice of saying out loud the things that were going well, naming them specifically, and watching him slowly learn that naming good things did not take them away. The gray colt won in Laramie, she would say. He would say. That's good, Gideon. A pause. Yes, he would say. Finally, it is. Small progress, real progress. The kind that accumulated into something you could stand on. The bi-weekly teaching sessions at the church hall had 12 regular participants now, and 3 who came when the ranch work allowed, and Edmund, who came every time without exception, and who had, at Ada's steady encouragement, begun training specifically towards something more formal. She had written 2 letters, one to a medical school in Chicago, one to a teaching hospital in Denver, inquiring about the possibility of correspondence courses and examination by post for students in territories without local institutions. Both letters had received responses that were cautious and bureaucratic, but not dismissive. She was working on them. It was Zeke who told her, on an evening in early May, what Gideon was planning. He didn't mean to. He was at the supper table, and Gideon was outside with the yearlings, and Zeke was talking about the spring breeding schedule and mentioned, in the middle of something else, that Gideon had been riding the south pasture 3 afternoons a week. Riding it how? Ada said. Zeke's expression shifted the fraction that told her he'd said something he hadn't planned to. Measuring, he said. Finally, she looked at him. He has a surveying kit, Zeke said, from a man in Dunmore. He's been measuring the south pasture and drawing plans, and I am not going to tell you more than that because it is not my conversation to have. She put down her fork. Zeke, Ada. He met her eyes. Let him do the thing. She picked her fork back up. That evening, after supper, Gideon asked her to walk with him. She put on her coat, and they walked out into the May evening, down the lane toward the south pasture. The light was going golden and long, the way spring light went in Wyoming, horizontal, warm, catching every blade of new grass and turning the whole valley something almost unreasonably beautiful. He stopped at the south pasture gate. He had something in his hand. She'd seen him pick it up from the desk as they left, but hadn't looked at it directly. Now he held it out to her. A ring. She looked at it. It was not a conventional ring. The metal was not uniform, not cast from a single source, but worked from multiple pieces, hammered flat and joined, the surface showing the labor of its construction in the slight variations of texture. She looked at it and thought about coins, about gold dust in small pouches, about the auction in the yard, and the things people had brought. She looked up at him. "It's from the gold dust," she said. "The pouch the Henderson mother brought," he said. "The woman whose child you treated in July, she gave it to Sister Agatha, and Sister Agatha gave it to me in March, and I took it to the smithy in Dunmore and asked him to make something." He paused. It took a while to get right. She looked at the ring, at the worked metal, the joined pieces, all the different hands it had passed through before it arrived here. He took her right hand, the scarred one, the burned one, the hand with the faint pull of old scar tissue along the palm, and he held it carefully, and he looked at her. "I want to say something," he said. She waited. "I waited 3 months for you to arrive, Ada," he said, "but I would have waited a lifetime to learn how to love you properly. Not as a master protecting a servant." He held her gaze, steady and certain, all the old lid gone, "but as an equal standing beside you." She looked at him for a long moment. At the weathered face, she had been reading for 15 months, learning the language of it, the specific vocabulary of what it showed and what it held back, and how to tell the difference. She took the ring from his hand. She looked at it. She put it on her right hand, the scarred hand, deliberately, where the scars were. He looked at her hand. "We didn't rescue each other, Gideon," she said. "We just picked up the broken pieces and built a home together." He was quiet. The evening light moved across him. Then he put his hand over hers, over the ring, and held it. They stood at the gate of the south pasture, while the light went golden, and then amber, and then the particular soft blue that came before dark, and the mountains held their snow, and the cottonwoods moved in the spring wind. And somewhere behind them, in the new barn, Ira was making his nightly circuit of his stall, with his ears up and his tail like a flag. The ranch was alive. The practice was growing. The teaching sessions were full. Edmund was corresponding with the Denver hospital on his own now, Ada having given him the letters and told him to continue them himself, because the correspondence was about his future and he should own it. Zeke had taken on 2 new hands in the spring, both young, both green, both learning from him with the focused intensity of people who recognized they were being taught by someone who had seen more than they could yet imagine. He taught them work without ceremony and expected them to do it right, and told them exactly once what right looked like. He didn't soften it. He didn't need to. They understood what he was. Rosa had delivered her first baby on her own 2 weeks ago, Ada present in the room but watching, hands in her lap, because Rosa had known what to do and had done it. And the moment after, when Rosa had looked at Ada across the room with the particular expression of someone who had just crossed a threshold they'd been working toward for months, was a moment Ada would keep. These were the seeds. She had not known in February, half dead in the snow, carrying her father's instruments through a blizzard, that she was carrying seeds. She had thought she was carrying tools, heavy iron and steel and glass, all the apparatus of the medicine her father had taught her, useful, practical, weighted with his memory and her intention. But tools and seeds were not as different as they seemed, if you understood what you were doing with them. Her father had understood. She was beginning to. Gideon was looking at the south pasture. "I want to put a building there," he said. "In the southeast corner, stone foundation, 2 rooms. Good light from the south windows." She looked at the corner he meant. "For what?" she said. "Whatever you need it for." He paused. "A proper clinic, a teaching room, both." He turned to look at her. "The church hall is Sister Agatha's generosity, and I am grateful for it. But you should have something that's yours." She looked at the southeast corner of the south pasture. Stone foundation, 2 rooms, good light. "It would take the summer to build," she said. Edmund says his crew can start in June if we have the stone ready. We'd need to source the stone. There's a good quarry site on the North Ridge. Zeke and I looked at it last week. She turned and looked at him. You've been planning this since March, she said. Longer, he said. Since the first teaching session in October. I watched you at the front of that room, and I thought, she needs more room than this. She looked at the pasture for a long time. The spring grass was coming in green and new over the dark earth, and the mountains were still there, behind everything the way they always were, holding their positions at the edge of the world. She thought about what it would look like. 2 rooms, south windows, stone that would last. Her father had worked in canvas tents and farmhouses and churches and barns. He had treated men in every undignified circumstance that war provided, and he had always said that the room didn't matter, only the hands. He was right, and he was also wrong, a little, because the room said something. It said, you were expected here. It said, this is a place where people are helped. It said, this is permanent. We are staying. Yes, she said. Gideon looked at her. Yes, she said again. Build it. He nodded once, the small definitive nod that she had long since learned to read as Gideon's way of saying he was satisfied. Not relieved, not surprised. Satisfied, the way a man was when something he'd believed would happen had finally been confirmed. He kept his hand over hers as the last of the light went. Above them, the first stars were coming out, very faint still against the pale sky, growing brighter as the dark deepened. The valley was settling into evening. Sounds the horses in the barn, the creek, along the east fence running high with snowmelt, the wind in the cottonwoods. Ada looked up at the stars. She thought about the woman who had stood in a Wyoming blizzard 14 months ago, with a trunk full of iron and steel, and no idea what she was walking toward. She thought about the cold, the blood on the snow, the man coming out of the white on a dark horse, and the moment she'd thrown the trunk and it had struck the stone, and the sound had cut through the storm like a gunshot. She had thrown her father's instruments at the dark and hoped something would hear. Something had. She pressed her thumb against the ring on her palm. The metal was warm from her hand. 15 months. 1 winter and a spring and a summer and a fall and another spring. A burned barn and rebuilt walls and a healed bone and a healed hand and 43 entries in the medical ledger and 12 women learning to save lives at a pine table on Thursday mornings. A ranch that was standing. A marriage that was real. A river, her father had said, found its way. Water was patient. Water worked through hard ground and cold ground, and ground that had been packed down by everything that had happened to it, and it found the low places, and it moved. The river was moving. Ada Vance Sterling, surgeon's daughter, mail-order bride, unlicensed doctor of Wyoming territory. She stood in the May evening, with the mountains behind her, and the cottonwoods talking in the wind, and she was still here, still moving, still building something worth the journey. There's something I want you to sit with for a moment before you walk away from Ada Vance's story. She didn't arrive in Wyoming as a hero. She arrived half-frozen, bleeding from the nose, on her knees in a snowdrift, holding on to a trunk full of her dead father's instruments because it was the only thing she had left to hold on to. She was late. She was broke. The man waiting for her had spent 3 months assuming she'd stolen from him and run. And the land itself seemed determined to finish what the cold had started. That's not a heroic entrance. That's a desperate one. And I think that's exactly the point. Because the story Ada Vance tells us the real story, underneath the blizzards and the poisoned horses and the burning barn, is not about strength the way we usually talk about strength. It's not about being unbreakable. Ada's hand burned. Her shoulder gave out. There were nights she lay in the dark listening to the wind work, at the corners of the cabin, knowing she didn't have enough money and enough time and enough of herself left to fight what was coming. What she had instead was something quieter and more durable than strength. She had the ability to keep moving when moving was the only option. To assess what was in front of her, use what she knew, and act not because she wasn't afraid, but because someone needed her to act in fear, was not a good enough reason to stop. Her father taught her that. A wound surgeon who treated black soldiers in 1863 when the army told him not to, who stood before a review board and said the medical oath he'd taken made no mention of race, and then went back and kept treating everyone who came through his door. He understood something that Ada inherited and carried west, that the value of a human life is not determined by how much money it carries, or what it looks like, or whether the powerful people in the room have decided to care about it. It is simply and completely equal, every time, without exception. That's a radical idea. It was radical in 1877. It is, if we're honest with ourselves, still radical in practice today, not in what we say, but in what we actually do when the cost of living, it becomes real. Ada paid that cost. She paid it in the cold of that first winter, in the daily grinding work of a ranch fighting to survive, in the burn scars on her right hand, in the enemies she made in that town, simply by treating people that the town's doctor had decided weren't worth his time. She paid it, and she kept paying it, and she never once suggested the price was too high. But here's what I want you to understand about Ada's story, the thing I think we miss if we read it, as just the tale of a tough frontier woman overcoming obstacles. Ada did not save the broken spur alone. She didn't save it because she was exceptional. She saved it because she understood something about the nature of trust and knowledge and human community that the creeds of the world never figure out. Because the creeds of the world are always too busy trying to own things to understand this. When you help people without condition, when you share what you know without hoarding it, when you treat every person who comes through your door as someone who deserves your full skill and your full attention, you are not depleting yourself. You are building something, something that cannot be bought or burned or foreclosed on. Something that shows up in a courthouse with coin pooled from mining camps and farms and encampments. Something that rebuilds a barn with timber and labor offered freely by people who remember what it felt like to be helped. This story is a work of historical fiction. All characters, events, and dialogue are entirely fictional and created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual historical events is coincidental and unintentional.